Hello friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I've been running loads through Louisiana for 22 years, and I know the bayou roads like the back of my hand. Every twist, every parish line, every unmarked turnoff that the GPS won't tell you about. You learn them because you have to. The main highways are fast, but they're not always smart. When weather hits, when traffic backs up for miles, when you're running tight on hours, you take the parish roads, the back routes, the ones that cut through land so flat and wet it feels like the earth is barely holding itself together. That's where you find the real Louisiana, the parts that don't make it onto postcards. Cypress trees hanging low over black water. Spanish moss swaying in air so thick it coats your lungs, and silence that presses against your ears like something alive. It was late September 2023, hurricane season still lingering like a bad memory. I'd just finished a delivery run out of Baton Rouge, flatbed load of industrial piping headed to a refinery site near Morgan City. The return leg was supposed to be easy, empty trailer, lightweight, straight shot back up to Lafayette to grab my next load. But around 9:30 p.m., the sky started doing that thing it does before a serious storm rolls in. The air went still, too still, and the clouds began stacking up in layers, dark and bruised looking, moving fast from the Gulf. My phone buzzed with a weather alert. Severe thunderstorm warning for Assumption Parish and surrounding areas. Heavy rain, possible flooding, wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour. I checked my fuel gauge, still 3/4 full, and considered my options. I could push through and try to beat it, or I could pull off and wait it out. I've been caught in storms before. White-knuckle drives where you can't see past your hood, where the rain hits so hard it sounds like gravel on the windshield. I'm not reckless. I pulled off at the next exit, a small parish road that would take me around the worst of it if I timed it right. The road was State Route 403, a narrow 2-lane that cuts through the heart of bayou country. No streetlights, no gas stations, just endless wetland on both sides, and the occasional rusted mailbox marking a driveway you'd never find twice. I'd driven it maybe a dozen times over the years, always in daylight, always with a load. Never like this, never empty, never at night with a storm breathing down my neck. The first drops hit my windshield around 9:45, fat and slow, the kind that warns you what's coming. Within 5 minutes, it was a downpour. Sheets of rain so thick my wipers could barely keep up, even on high. The road ahead disappeared into a gray wall of water, and I had to slow down to 30, then 20, just to stay on the asphalt. The ditches on either side were already filling, dark water creeping up toward the road like it was testing the edges, seeing how far it could go. I kept my hands tight on the wheel, eyes locked forward, watching for the reflective markers that were supposed to guide you but always seemed to vanish right when you needed them most. That's when I saw the barricade. 2 wooden sawhorses stretched across both lanes, orange and white stripes barely visible through the rain, and a metal sign wired to the center that read, "Road closed. Parish maintenance." I hit the brakes, felt the trailer shift slightly behind me as the rig slowed on the wet pavement. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, wipers slapping back and forth trying to make sense of it. There'd been no warning, no detour signs, nothing on the GPS about a closure. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. Beyond the barricade, the road looked fine. No construction equipment, no crews, no lights, just empty wet asphalt stretching into the dark. It didn't sit right. Maintenance doesn't close roads at night during a storm. They close them before the storm, or they wait until after. They sure as hell don't leave sawhorses out in the middle of nowhere with no crew, no cones, no nothing. I grabbed my phone to check for updates, but the signal was gone. 1 bar, no service, the screen just spinning uselessly. I cursed under my breath and tossed it onto the passenger seat. I could turn around, backtrack 15 miles to the main highway and lose an hour, maybe more if the roads were flooded. Or I could move the barricade, roll through, and hope it was just some lazy parish worker who forgot to pull the closure after a job. I'm not the kind of guy who breaks rules for fun, but I'm also not the kind who wastes time when there's no good reason. I put the rig in park, pulled my rain jacket over my head, and climbed down into the storm. The rain hit me like a fist, cold and relentless, soaking through my jeans in seconds. I jogged to the barricades, grabbed the first sawhorse and dragged it to the shoulder. It was heavier than it looked, waterlogged and awkward, and by the time I moved the second one, I was drenched and pissed off. I glanced down the road one more time, saw nothing, and jogged back to the cab. I shifted into gear and rolled forward slowly, eyes scanning the road for potholes, debris, anything that might explain the closure. The storm was getting worse. Wind picking up now, pushing against the trailer and making the whole rig sway slightly. The rain was coming sideways, hammering the driver's side window so hard I could barely hear myself think. I kept my speed low, 25 at most, watching the edges of the road where the water was rising fast, spilling over into the lane in places. And that's when I saw the lights. Not headlights, not the reflective glow of road markers, but work lights. Big portable ones, the kind you see at construction sites, set up in a wide half-circle just off the road about a quarter-mile ahead. They were bright, almost blinding against the rain, and they lit up a section of gravel clearing near the tree line. I slowed even more, confused. There were vehicles, 3 of them. 2 panel vans, dark-colored, windows tinted, and a pickup truck with mud flaps and a tool rack. All parked in a loose cluster, engines off, no one visible. And in the center of the clearing, stacked on wooden pallets and covered with tarps that flapped violently in the wind, were crates, dozens of them, unmarked, no logos, no shipping labels, just plain wood and black plastic wrap. I felt my guts tighten. This wasn't maintenance, this wasn't a breakdown, this was something else, something deliberate. Something that didn't want to be seen. I eased off the gas and let the rig coast, trying to decide whether to stop or keep moving. My instincts screamed at me to keep going, to roll past like I hadn't seen a thing, but my brain was already cataloging details. The vans, the crates, the lights set up like a perimeter. It looked like a transfer, a handoff. The kind of operation that happens in places where no one's supposed to be watching. I was about to press the gas and get the hell out of there when a figure stepped into the road. He came out of nowhere, just appeared in my headlights like he'd been waiting, one hand raised, palm out, the universal signal to stop. He was wearing a tan uniform, badge visible on his chest even through the rain, and a wide-brimmed hat that dripped water off the edges. Parish deputy. My stomach dropped. I hit the brakes gently, bringing the rig to a stop about 20 feet from where he stood. He didn't move, just stood there in the rain, hand still raised, staring at me through the windshield. I could see his face now, mid-40s, weathered, the kind of face that's seen a lot and doesn't give much away. His other hand rested on his belt, close to his sidearm but not touching it. Not yet. I rolled down my window a few inches, rain immediately spitting into the cab, and called out over the storm. "Evening, officer. Road was blocked back there. Didn't see any crew, so I moved it." He didn't respond right away. Just walked forward slowly, boots splashing through the shallow water pooling on the asphalt, until he was right next to my door. He looked up at me, rain streaming down his face, and when he spoke, his voice was calm, almost friendly, but there was something underneath it, something hard. "Roads closed for a reason," he said. "You need to turn around." I glanced past him toward the clearing, toward the lights and the vans and the crates. He noticed, his jaw tightened just slightly, and his hand moved, just an inch, closer to his belt. "Private property back there," he said. "Parish business. Nothing to do with you." I nodded slowly, keeping my hands visible on the wheel. "Understood. I'll turn around. Just trying to avoid the storm." He stared at me for a long moment, eyes flicking to my trailer, to my cab, to the company logo on the door. Then he stepped back and pointed down the road, back the way I came. "Move those barricades back when you go. Don't want anyone else making the same mistake." I nodded again, said nothing, and started to roll up my window. But before I could, he leaned in close, just enough that I could see the rain dripping off the brim of his hat, and he said quietly, almost like he was doing me a favor, "You didn't see anything here tonight. You understand me?" It wasn't a question, it was an instruction. I met his eyes, held them for a second, and said, "Yes, sir." He stepped back, waved me off, and I put the rig in reverse, backing up slowly, carefully, until I had enough room to turn around. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, not from the rain, but from the weight of what I'd just seen and what I'd just been told to forget. I managed a clumsy three-point turn, the trailer swinging wide, almost clipping the ditch, and then I was heading back the way I came, the deputy's silhouette shrinking in my mirrors until the rain swallowed him completely. I didn't stop, I didn't slow down, I just drove. Heart pounding, mind racing, trying to make sense of what the hell I'd just stumbled into. By the time I reached the barricades, I was drenched in sweat despite the cold. I climbed out, dragged the sawhorses back into place, and got back in the cab without looking back. I drove 15 miles in silence. No radio, no phone, just the sound of the rain and the hum of the engine. When I finally hit the main highway, I pulled into the first truck stop I could find, a grimy little place with flickering neon and a half-empty lot. I parked, killed the engine, and sat there in the dark, staring at nothing. My phone buzzed. Signal was back. I checked it, hands still trembling. No messages, no alerts, just the weather warning still flashing. I should have called someone, dispatch maybe, or the state police. But I didn't. Because that deputy's voice was still in my head. "You didn't see anything here tonight." And the way he'd said it, the way his hand had hovered near his gun, told me that forgetting wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. I didn't sleep that night. Just sat in the cab, door locked, windows up, watching the storm batter the parking lot and trying to convince myself I'd done the right thing by driving away. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to see, and now I had to decide whether to stay quiet or risk finding out what happens to people who don't. The storm didn't let up until nearly 3 a.m. I sat in that truck stop parking lot, engine idling to keep the heat running, watching the rain hammer against the windshield and trying to make sense of what I'd driven into. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those crates stacked under the work lights. The way the tarps snapped in the wind, the deliberate setup of it all. And I kept seeing that deputy's face, the way he'd looked at me when he said I didn't see anything. Like he was giving me a gift and a threat all at once. My phone sat on the dash, screen dark, and I must have picked it up a dozen times, finger hovering over the dial pad, trying to decide who to call. But every time I put it back down, because the truth was I didn't know what I'd seen. Crates in a clearing? Could be anything. Parish deputy doing his job? Nothing illegal about that. I had no proof, no photos, nothing but a bad feeling in my guts and the memory of a man's voice telling me to forget. By sunrise, the rain had stopped completely, leaving everything soaked and steaming in the early light. The air smelled like wet dirt and gasoline, and the parking lot was dotted with puddles that reflected the gray sky. I climbed down from the cab, stretched my back, and walked into the truck stop diner. The place was nearly empty. Just a couple of local guys nursing coffee at the counter and a waitress who looked like she'd been awake for 2 days straight. I ordered coffee and eggs, sat in a corner booth and tried to act normal, but my mind wouldn't stop turning it over. The barricade, the clearing, the deputy, the way everything had been set up like they owned that stretch of road, like they knew no one would be coming through. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that's exactly what they'd counted on. A closed road, a storm, no witnesses, except I'd moved the barricade. I'd seen what I wasn't supposed to see. I was halfway through my eggs when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at it for a second, debating whether to answer, then swiped it open. Yeah? Silence on the other end. Just the faint hiss of static and maybe breathing. Then a voice, low and measured, with that same bayou drawl I'd heard the night before. You made it back to the highway safe. That's good, real good. My blood went cold. I recognized the voice immediately. It was him, the deputy, Hollis Boudreaux. I'd seen the name on his badge when he'd stepped close to my window. I didn't say anything, just waited, every muscle in my body tensing up. He continued, voice calm, almost friendly, like we were old pals catching up. Listen, I wanted to make sure we understood each other last night. Sometimes folks see things on the road, especially in bad weather, and they get confused. Start remembering details that maybe didn't happen the way they think. You follow me? I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. I follow you. There was a pause, and I could hear something in the background, maybe a radio crackling, voices talking low. Then Boudreaux spoke again, and this time there was an edge to it, just a hint of steel underneath the politeness. Good, because filing reports, making calls to people who don't need to be involved, that can cause a lot of trouble. For everyone. And I'd hate to see a working man like yourself get tangled up in something that's got nothing to do with him. You've got a clean record, good reputation. Let's keep it that way. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a directive. And the fact that he knew my record, knew enough about me to make that call, told me this wasn't just some local deputy worried about gossip. This was organized. This was people with resources, people who could reach out and touch you if they needed to. I forced myself to sound calm, cooperative. I understand. No trouble from me. Another pause, longer this time, like he was weighing whether to believe me. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, You take care out there. Roads can be dangerous, especially for folks who don't know when to mind their own business. The line went dead. I sat there staring at the phone, hand trembling slightly, the diner suddenly feeling too small, too exposed. He'd called me. Less than 12 hours after I'd driven away, he'd tracked me down and made sure I knew the score. That meant they had my plate number, probably ran it through the system, got my name, my phone number, maybe even my home address. I wasn't anonymous anymore. I was on their radar, and the message was clear. Stay quiet, or things get complicated. I paid for my breakfast in cash, walked back to the truck, and sat in the cab for a long time just staring at the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to call the state police, tell them everything, hand it off to someone with more authority, and let them deal with it. But the other part, the part that had been driving these roads for 22 years, the part that knew how things worked in the deep parishes, that part told me I'd be wasting my time. Because if Hollis Boudreaux had the reach to get my number that fast, if he had the confidence to call me directly and make threats, then he wasn't working alone, and whoever he was working with had enough pull to make sure that any report I filed would disappear into a drawer somewhere, forgotten, buried under paperwork and jurisdictional red tape. I'd seen it before, different situation, same outcome. In places like this, the law doesn't always work the way it's supposed to. Sometimes it works for whoever's got the deepest pockets or the oldest connections. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, heading north toward Lafayette to pick up my next load. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that every car that passed me on the highway might be tailing me, that every phone call might be another warning. I kept checking my mirrors, kept my speed steady, and tried to focus on the road, but my mind kept drifting back to that clearing, to those crates, to the way Boudreaux had looked at me like I was a problem that needed managing. I wondered what was in those crates. Drugs, maybe, or stolen goods. Could be weapons, could be something worse. Whatever it was valuable enough to set up a whole operation in the middle of a storm, valuable enough to have a parish deputy running interference. And now I knew about it, which made me a liability. By the time I reached Lafayette, it was mid-morning and the sun was out, burning off the last of the clouds. I pulled into the distribution yard, checked in with the dispatcher, and started the process of hooking up my next load. Everything felt normal, routine, like the night before had been some kind of fever dream. But it wasn't, I knew that. And as I ran through the pre-trip inspection, checking lights and brakes and tire pressure, I couldn't stop thinking about what to do next. I could keep my head down, run my routes, and hope they forgot about me. Or I could push, dig deeper, try to find out what I'd stumbled into. Neither option felt safe. The first one left me vulnerable, always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if they'd decide I was too much of a risk. The second one put me directly in their crosshairs. Either way, I was trapped. I was securing the straps on my flatbed load when I heard the sound of a diesel engine pulling into the yard behind me. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a wrecker truck rolling in, big and battered, with a winch mounted on the back and rust streaking the doors. It pulled up near the office and idled there for a moment before the driver climbed out. I recognized the type immediately, independent operator, probably worked the backroads and rural breakdowns, the kind of driver who knew every ditch and dead end in 3 parishes. The driver was a woman, maybe late 30s, wearing grease-stained coveralls and a ball cap pulled low over her eyes. She walked with the kind of confidence that comes from years of pulling rigs out of bad spots, and she nodded at me as she passed, professional but not friendly. I nodded back and went back to my straps, but something about her felt familiar, like I'd seen her somewhere before. Then it hit me. Last night. On my way to that closed road, I'd passed a wrecker parked on the shoulder maybe 5 miles before the barricade. I'd barely registered it at the time, just another breakdown or roadside assist, nothing unusual. But now, seeing her here, in this yard, the same truck, it felt like too much of a coincidence. I finished securing the load and walked over to the office, keeping my movements casual, like I was just checking on paperwork. She was inside, talking to the yard manager, pointing at something on a clipboard. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the manager looked annoyed, shaking his head and waving her off. She said something else, sharper this time, and he sighed and picked up the phone. I hung back, pretending to read a notice board by the door, and waited. When she came out, I caught her eye and gave a small nod. Rough night? She stopped, looked at me for a second like she was sizing me up, then shrugged. Always is this time of year. Storm season brings out the stupid. People driving too fast, taking roads they shouldn't, getting stuck in places they got no business being. Her voice had that same bayou drawl, but sharper, more clipped. She wasn't making small talk. She was making a point. I kept my tone light, casual. Yeah, I hear that. Saw a wrecker out on 403 last night. That you?" Her eyes narrowed just slightly, and for a moment she didn't say anything. Then she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Might have been. I work a lot of parishes. Can't remember every call-out." That was a lie. I could see it in the way her jaw tightened, the way her hand moved to her belt loop like she was nervous. She remembered. She knew exactly where she'd been and why. I didn't push it. Just nodded and said, "Must be tough working alone out there. Dangerous roads, especially at night." She stared at me for a beat longer, then stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough that I had to lean in to hear. "You want some advice? Stop asking questions. Stop looking for answers. Just drive your truck, do your job, and forget whatever it is you think you saw." My stomach dropped. She knew. Somehow, she knew. Maybe Boudreaux had called her too. Maybe she'd been part of it from the start. I didn't know. But the fact that she was here, now, warning me off, told me that whatever I'd stumbled into was bigger than I thought. Before I could respond, she turned and walked back to her wrecker, climbed in, and pulled out of the yard without looking back. I stood there in the heat, sweat beading on my forehead, trying to process what had just happened. 2 warnings in less than 6 hours. First Boudreaux, now her. They were coordinated, deliberate, making sure I got the message loud and clear. And the worst part was, I didn't even know who they were. A deputy, a wrecker operator, maybe more. How many people were involved? How deep did this go? I walked back to my truck, climbed into the cab and sat there staring at the windshield. My hands were shaking again. Not from fear exactly, but from the weight of realization. I wasn't just being warned, I was being managed. And if I didn't fall in line, if I kept pushing, I had no doubt they'd escalate. The question was, how far would they go? I pulled out of the yard and headed toward the interstate, mind racing through my options. I could disappear, take some time off, lay low until this blew over. But that assumed it would blow over, and something told me it wouldn't. Not unless they were sure I'd stay quiet. I could go to the feds, bypass the local system entirely, but that would take time, evidence, proof I didn't have. And in the meantime, I'd be exposed, vulnerable, a target. Or I could do what they wanted. Keep driving, keep my mouth shut, and hope they decided I wasn't worth the trouble. That was the smart play, the safe play. But it also meant living with the knowledge that I'd back down, that I'd let something slide because I was too scared to stand up. And that didn't sit right with me, not even a little. I was about 10 miles out from Lafayette when I saw the sign for a rest area ahead. I pulled in, parked in the back lot away from the other trucks, and killed the engine. I needed to think, needed to figure out my next move before I committed to anything. The rest area was quiet, just a couple of cars and a camper van near the facilities. I grabbed my phone and opened the browser, started searching for anything I could find about parish deputies in Assumption Parish, specifically Hollis Boudreaux. Nothing came up. No news articles, no public records, no social media. It was like he didn't exist outside of that badge and that uniform. I tried the wrecker operator next, searched for towing services operating in the area, looking for a match to the truck I'd seen. There were a dozen listings, but none of them had photos, and most of the numbers went to voicemail. Dead ends, all of it. I was about to give up when I noticed a missed call notification from an hour ago. Another unknown number. My guts tightened. I checked the voicemail, half expecting another warning, another threat. But the voice that came through was different. Older, rougher, and unfamiliar. "You don't know me, but I know what you saw last night. If you're smart, you'll meet me, alone. There's a diner off Highway 90, just past Raceland, Thibodeau's Cafe. Be there at 6 tonight. Come alone and don't tell anyone. If you want answers, that's your only chance." The line went dead. I played it again, listening for anything that might tell me who it was, but there was nothing. Just that voice, low and gravelly like someone who'd spent a lifetime smoking and shouting. Thibodeau. That name stuck in my head. The wrecker operator's name. I'd seen it on the door of her truck when she pulled out. Thibodeau, Towing and Recovery. Was this connected to her? A family member, maybe? Or was it just another coincidence in a string of them that were starting to feel anything but random? I sat there for a long time, weighing the risk. Meeting a stranger in some backwater diner based on a cryptic voicemail was a good way to end up in a ditch. But if this person had answers, if they knew what was going on and were willing to talk, it might be the only way I'd ever understand what I'd driven into. And more than that, it might be the only way I'd know how to protect myself. Because right now, I was blind. I didn't know the players, didn't know the stakes, didn't know how far this thing reached, and that ignorance was going to get me hurt, or worse. I checked the time. It was just past noon. 6 hours until the meeting. I could make it to Raceland easily, scope out the diner, maybe get a sense of whether this was legit or a setup. Or I could ignore it, keep driving, and hope for the best. But I knew I wouldn't do that. I'd come too far, seen too much. I needed to know. I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway heading south toward Raceland. The sun was high now, burning through the humidity and turning the asphalt into a shimmering mirror. I kept my speed steady, eyes flicking to the mirrors every few seconds, watching for anyone who might be following. Nothing stood out, but that didn't mean they weren't there. If Boudreaux and his people were as connected as they seemed, they could be tracking me a dozen different ways. GPS on my phone, eyes at the truck stops, informants along the route. Paranoia was setting in, but it didn't feel irrational. It felt necessary. I passed through small towns with names I barely registered, clusters of houses and gas stations and churches that all blurred together in the heat. The closer I got to Raceland, the tighter my chest felt, the more my instincts screamed at me to turn around. But I didn't. I kept going. By the time I reached the outskirts of Raceland, it was late afternoon, and the sky was starting to bruise again, clouds building in the west like the storms weren't done with us yet. I found the diner easily enough, a low concrete building with a faded sign that read Thibodeau's Cafe in peeling red letters. The parking lot was gravel, mostly empty except for a couple of sedans and a pickup truck that had seen better days. I pulled the rig into the back corner, nose out, and sat there for a minute just watching. No movement inside that I could see, no one sitting in the cars. It looked normal, quiet, exactly the kind of place where locals grabbed coffee and pie and minded their own business. But normal didn't mean safe. I checked my phone, 5:45. 15 minutes early. I climbed down from the cab, left the engine running, and walked toward the diner, every sense on high alert. The gravel crunched under my boots, loud in the stillness, and I could feel the weight of my phone in my pocket, the only connection I had to the outside world if things went sideways. The door chimed as I stepped inside, and the smell of fryer grease and old coffee hit me immediately. The interior was exactly what I expected. Vinyl booths along the windows, a long counter with stools, and a kitchen visible through a pass-through window in the back. There were maybe 5 people inside, all locals by the look of them, older folks nursing drinks and not paying me any attention. I scanned the room, looking for anyone who might be waiting for me, but no one made eye contact. I picked a booth near the back, facing the door, and slid in. A waitress appeared almost immediately, tired eyes and a stained apron, and I ordered coffee just to have something to do with my hands. She brought it without a word and disappeared back behind the counter. 6 o'clock came and went. No one approached, no one even looked my way. I sipped my coffee, watched the door, and tried not to let the tension show on my face. Maybe it was a setup. Maybe I'd been lured here for nothing. Or worse, for something I wouldn't see coming until it was too late. I was about to give it another 5 minutes and leave when the door chimed again, and she walked in. The wrecker operator. Same coveralls, same ball cap. But this time her expression was different. Not guarded or hostile, but tired, worn down. She spotted me immediately, walked over without hesitation, and slid into the booth across from me. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she sighed, pulled off her cap, and ran a hand through her hair. "You came. Wasn't sure you would?" I stared at her, trying to read her, trying to figure out if this was another warning or something else. "You left me the voicemail?" She nodded. "Yeah." Borrowed my uncle's phone so it couldn't be traced back to me. Hollis has people everywhere, checks call logs, monitors everything. I had to be careful. Hollis. Boudreaux. Hearing his first name from her mouth felt strange. Too familiar, like they were close. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my voice low. "What do you want?" She didn't answer right away, just looked at me with those tired eyes, like she was carrying something heavy and didn't know how to put it down. Then, quietly, almost like she was confessing, she said, "I want to tell you the truth. Because if I don't, you're going to keep digging, and they're going to bury you. And I can't have that on my conscience." I stared at Inez Thibodeau across the table, trying to read whether this was genuine or just another layer of the game they were playing. Her hands were wrapped around a coffee mug the waitress had brought without asking, and I could see the calluses on her palms, the grease still embedded under her fingernails despite obvious scrubbing. These were working hands, hands that had spent years pulling chains and operating winches in conditions most people would never endure. But that didn't mean I could trust her. In my experience, the people who look the most honest are often the ones running the longest cons. Still, there was something in her eyes, something raw and exhausted, that made me lean in instead of walking out. "Why now?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "You had your chance this morning at the yard. You could have told me then. Instead, you warned me off, told me to forget what I saw. So why the change of heart?" She took a long sip of her coffee, eyes distant, like she was looking at something far beyond the walls of this dingy diner. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, and I had to strain to hear her over the distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen. "Because this morning, I still thought I could protect you by scaring you off. I thought if I came at you hard enough, you'd just let it go and move on. But then Hollis called me, told me you were still poking around, still asking questions, and I realized you're not the type to back down. You're going to keep digging until you hit something, and when you do, they're going to bury you so deep nobody will ever find you." The way she said it, so matter-of-fact, so certain, sent a chill down my spine despite the humid heat pressing in through the windows. I leaned back slightly, giving myself space to think, to process. Who's they? Boudreaux and who else? Inez glanced toward the door, then back at me, and I saw her jaw tighten. It's not just Hollis. He's just the face of it, the one who handles things on the ground. But he's got people above him, people with real power, parish administrators, maybe even someone in the state system. I don't know all the names, and I don't want to. What I do know is that what you saw last night, those crates, that operation, it's been running for at least 2 years, maybe longer. And it's not small time. We're talking serious money, serious organization. I felt my stomach turn. 2 years. That meant this wasn't some opportunistic scheme, some one-off deal gone wrong. This was infrastructure, a system, something that had been carefully built and maintained, and I'd stumbled right into the middle of it. "What's in the crates?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Inez hesitated, her fingers tightening around the mug. "I don't know for sure. Nobody tells me specifics. My job is simple. I block off roads, make it look like legitimate closures or breakdowns. Keep civilian traffic away from the transfer points. If someone gets through anyway, like you did, I'm supposed to report it to Hollis and he handles it. Usually that means a friendly warning, maybe a little pressure to keep quiet, but sometimes—" She trailed off, and the silence that followed was heavier than anything she could have said. "Sometimes what?" I pressed, needing to hear it, needing to understand just how deep this went. She met my eyes, and for the first time I saw real fear there. Not for herself, but for what she was about to tell me. Sometimes people don't take the warning. They go to the state police, or they start talking to the wrong people, or they try to be heroes. And then they have accidents. Their rigs go off the road in the middle of the night. Their brakes fail on a steep grade. They disappear on a long haul and turn up weeks later in a ditch somewhere, if they turn up at all. The official reports always say driver error, fatigue, mechanical failure, and nobody questions it because nobody wants to look too close. The weight of what she was saying settled over me like a lead blanket. I'd heard stories over the years, legends really, about drivers who'd vanished under suspicious circumstances. Most of us chalked it up to the dangers of the job, the isolation, the long hours on empty roads. But now I was hearing that at least some of those disappearances weren't accidents. They were eliminations, clean and efficient, designed to look like the hazards that came with the territory. "How many?" I asked, my voice rougher than I intended. Inez shook her head. "I don't know. I don't keep count. But enough that when Hollis tells you to forget something, you forget it. Because the alternative is being another statistic, another name on a memorial wall at some truck stop, another cautionary tale about staying alert on the road." I sat back, mind racing, trying to fit all the pieces together. The closed road, the transfer operation, Boudreaux's phone call, Inez's warnings, and now this. A pattern of deaths stretching back who knows how long, all designed to protect whatever they were moving through these parishes. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "If you're part of it, if you've been helping them, why risk blowing it up now?" She looked down at her coffee, and I saw her shoulders sag slightly, like the weight of her own complicity was finally catching up to her. "Because I'm tired. Tired of being afraid. Tired of being part of something that's gotten people killed. I got into this because I needed the money. My wrecker service was going under. I was behind on everything, and Hollis offered me a way out. Easy work, he said. Just block roads during transfers, keep people away, and I'd get paid more in a month than I'd make in 6 doing legitimate calls. I told myself it was harmless, that I was just a lookout, that whatever they were moving wasn't my problem." She paused, swallowing hard, and I could see the regret etched into every line of her face. "But then I started hearing things. Stories about drivers who'd seen too much, who'd asked too many questions. And I realized I wasn't just blocking roads. I was helping them hunt people. Every time I set up a barricade, every time I called Hollis to report someone, I was putting a target on their back. And I can't do it anymore. I won't. So I'm telling you everything I know. And then I'm done. I'm out. I don't care what happens to me after this. I just need you to understand what you're up against so you can make the right call." I studied her for a long moment, looking for any sign of deception, any hint that this was just another manipulation. But all I saw was exhaustion and guilt, the kind that comes from carrying a secret too heavy for too long. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her, because if she was telling the truth, then I finally had a chance to understand the threat, to know what I was dealing with. But if she was lying, if this was all part of some elaborate setup, then I was walking straight into a trap. "What do you want from me?" I asked finally. "Why not just disappear? Why bring me into it?" Inez looked me straight in the eye, and when she spoke, her voice was steady, resolved. "Because you're already in it. The moment you moved that barricade, the moment Hollis saw your face, you became part of this whether you wanted to or not. And I figure you deserve a fighting chance. You deserve to know what's coming so you can decide how to handle it." I nodded slowly, accepting that. "All right, so tell me. What exactly am I up against? Who are these people? And what are they moving?" Inez glanced around the diner again, making sure no one was paying attention to us, then leaned in closer, her voice dropping even lower. "The operation runs out of several parishes, Assumption, Terrebonne, Lafourche. They use the backroads, the bayou routes that most people don't even know exist, to move product from the Gulf up to distribution points inland. The crates you saw, they're usually packed with high-grade narcotics. Cocaine, fentanyl, sometimes both. It comes in on fishing boats, gets transferred to trucks at isolated docks or clearings, then moves north through the state. The whole thing is protected by a network of local officials, deputies like Hollis, maybe a judge or two, definitely some parish administrators who make sure inspections don't happen and paperwork disappears." My mouth went dry. Drugs. Of course it was drugs. The Gulf Coast had always been a corridor for smuggling, everyone knew that. But I'd assumed it was mostly small-time operations, independent crews running modest loads and hoping to avoid detection. What Inez was describing was something else entirely. A coordinated network with official protection, moving serious weight through the heart of Louisiana. "How much are we talking about?" I asked. She shrugged. "I don't know exact numbers, but based on the size of the transfers I've helped cover, we're talking millions of dollars in product moving through every month, maybe more. And it's been running smooth for years because they've got the system locked down. They know which roads to use, which officials to pay off, and how to make problems disappear. It's bulletproof, or it was until you came along." I felt a surge of anger rising in my chest, anger at the corruption, at the arrogance of these people who thought they could operate with impunity, at my own bad luck for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But beneath the anger was something else, fear. Because Inez was right. I was a problem now, a loose end that needed tying off, and if they were willing to kill drivers to protect their operation, they wouldn't hesitate to do the same to me. "What's Hollis's role in all this?" I asked. "Is he just muscle or is he higher up the chain?" Inez shook her head. "Hollis is middle management. He doesn't make the big decisions, but he's trusted. He coordinates the ground-level stuff, makes sure transfers go smoothly, deals with witnesses, handles enforcement when things go wrong. He's got a mean streak, too. I've seen him work. He doesn't lose his temper, doesn't make mistakes. He just does what needs to be done, cold and efficient. And he's got backup, other deputies on the payroll, guys who'll swear to whatever story needs telling if it comes to that." The picture was getting clearer, and I didn't like what I was seeing. A well-oiled machine with the layers of protection, run by people who knew exactly what they were doing and had no qualms about removing obstacles. "So, what do I do?" I asked, more to myself than to her. "I can't go to the local cops. They're in on it. State police might be compromised too. The feds would take weeks to investigate if they even believed me. And in the meantime, I'm a sitting duck, so what's my move?" Inez hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small flip phone, the kind you buy at a gas station with prepaid minutes. She slid it across the table toward me. "This is clean. No GPS, no contract, no way to trace it back to either of us. There's one number programmed in. It's a contact I have, someone who's been trying to build a case against this network for years, but hasn't had enough evidence to move forward. He's legit, Works out of the New Orleans field office for a federal task force. If you call him, tell him everything. He might be able to protect you. Might, but it's your best shot." I picked up the phone, turned it over in my hands. It felt too small, too insignificant to be a lifeline, but it was more than I'd had 5 minutes ago. "Why don't you call him yourself?" I asked. "If you want out, if you're done with this, why not go to him directly?" Inez's expression hardened. "Because I'm complicit. I've helped them for 2 years. I've taken their money, blocked their roads, turned a blind eye to things I shouldn't have. If I go to the feds, the best I can hope for is witness protection and a prison sentence. Maybe they'd cut me a deal, maybe not. But either way, my life is over. You, though, you're clean. You didn't do anything wrong except be in the wrong place at the wrong time. If you go to them, if you give them what they need, you've got a chance to walk away from this. I don't." There was a finality to her words, a resignation that told me she'd already made peace with whatever was coming for her. I wanted to argue, to tell her she could still get out, still make this right. But I knew it wouldn't matter. She'd already decided her fate. "What about you?" I asked. "What are you going to do after this?" She stood up, dropping a few bills on the table to cover the coffee. "I'm going to disappear for a while. Head west, maybe, or up north. Somewhere they can't find me easily. I've got a little money saved, enough to lay low for a few months. After that, I don't know. Maybe I'll come back and face the music. Maybe I won't. But either way, I'm done helping them. And if they come after me, at least I'll know I tried to do one decent thing before it all went to hell." She turned to leave, but I reached out and grabbed her wrist, stopping her. "Wait, if I call this guy, if I go to the feds, what happens to Hollis and the others? Will they know it was you who talked?" Inez looked down at my hand, then back up at me, and I saw something almost like gratitude in her eyes. "They'll figure it out eventually, but by then I'll be gone. And if you're smart, you'll be under federal protection. Just don't wait too long. Hollis is watching you. He's got people keeping tabs, and the longer you stay visible, the more likely it is he'll make a move. Use that phone tonight. Call the number, tell them everything, and let them handle it. It's your only play." She pulled her wrist free gently and walked out of the diner without looking back. I sat there for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. The waitress came by and refilled my coffee without asking, and I muttered a thanks without really hearing myself. My mind was churning through everything Inez had told me, trying to separate fact from fear, trying to figure out my next move. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to call that number right now, get federal protection, and let them dismantle this network from the inside. But part of me hesitated, because once I made that call, there was no going back. I'd be a witness, a cooperator, someone whose life would be turned upside down by depositions and trials and relocation. I'd lose my anonymity, my freedom to just drive and be left alone. Everything I'd built over 22 years would be gone, traded for safety, and the hope that the system would actually protect me. But the alternative was worse. If I did nothing, if I tried to just disappear and hope they forgot about me, I'd spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And Inez was right. Hollis was watching. He'd made that clear with his phone call. He knew where I was, what I was doing, and he had the resources to track me anywhere I went. Running wouldn't save me. It would just delay the inevitable. I drained the rest of my coffee, pocketed the phone, and stood up. The diner felt too small now, too exposed, and I needed to move, needed to think while I was driving. I left cash on the table and walked out into the fading light of early evening. The sky was bruising purple and orange in the west, and the air smelled like rain again. another storm building just beyond the horizon. I climbed back into my truck, started the engine, and sat there for a moment with my hands on the wheel, trying to center myself. Then I pulled out onto the highway heading north with no particular destination in mind, just the need to keep moving. The phone sat on the passenger seat, a silent reminder of the choice I had to make. I could call tonight, like Inez said, or I could wait, gather more evidence, try to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with before I committed to anything. But even as I thought it, I knew I was stalling. The evidence didn't matter. What mattered was survival, and the clock was ticking. I was about 20 miles out from Raceland when I noticed the headlights behind me. At first, I thought nothing of it, just another truck or car sharing the road. But as the minutes ticked by, the vehicle stayed exactly the same distance back, matching my speed, never trying to pass. I changed lanes, it changed lanes. I sped up slightly, it sped up, I slowed down, it slowed down. My heart started pounding. I grabbed the phone, almost called the number right then and there, but forced myself to stay calm. It could be nothing. Could be someone headed the same direction. Could be coincidence. But my instincts were screaming otherwise. I took the next exit without signaling. A sudden sharp turn that would catch any tail off guard. The vehicle behind me followed. No more doubts. I was being tailed. I pushed the accelerator, feeling the rig surge forward as I wound through the empty streets of a small town I didn't recognize. The headlights stayed with me, closer now, more aggressive. I could see it in my mirrors, a dark SUV with tinted windows, and my blood ran cold. This wasn't Hollis. He would have pulled me over by now, used his badge and authority. This was someone else, someone without the need for pretense. I ran a red light, blew through a stop sign, anything to create distance. The SUV matched every move, relentless and precise. I reached for my CB radio, thought about calling for help, but who would I call? The local sheriff? The state police? Anyone I contacted could be part of the network, could be working with whoever was in that SUV. I was on my own. I had to lose them or outrun them, and neither option seemed possible in a fully loaded rig on unfamiliar roads. I took another turn, this one onto a narrow access road that led toward an industrial area, chain-link fences and dark warehouses lining both sides. Bad choice. The road dead-ended at a locked gate, and I had nowhere to go. I slammed on the brakes, threw the rig into reverse, but the SUV had already blocked the exit, pulling sideways across the road. I was boxed in. I grabbed the phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it, and pulled up the programmed number. Before I could hit call, the driver's side door of the SUV opened, and a figure stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, face hidden in shadow. He didn't rush, didn't shout, just walked toward my truck with the calm confidence of someone who knew I had nowhere to run. I locked the doors, pointless as it was, and held the phone up, finger hovering over the call button. If this was it, if this was how it ended, at least I could make the call, leave a record, give the feds something to work with. The figure stopped just outside my window, close enough that I could see his face now in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. It wasn't Hollis Boudreaux. It was someone I'd never seen before, younger, maybe early 30s, with cold eyes that reflected no emotion. He tapped on the window with one knuckle, a slow, deliberate rhythm, and gestured for me to roll it down. I didn't move. He tapped again, harder this time, and then he spoke, voice muffled but clear enough. "We need to talk. Turn off the engine and step out. Nobody has to get hurt." I didn't believe him, not for a second, but I also knew I was out of options. The phone was still in my hand, and I made a split-second decision. I hit call, then tucked the phone under my seat where he couldn't see it, screen facing down, hoping it would connect. hoping someone on the other end would hear whatever happened next. Then I turned off the engine, unlocked the door, and slowly climbed down. The man stepped back, giving me space, but his hand rested on something at his hip. A gun, maybe, or a knife. I couldn't tell in the darkness. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Doesn't matter. What matters is that you've been making people nervous, asking questions, meeting with people you shouldn't. That's not smart." I felt anger flare up, cutting through the fear. I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted to drive through a storm, that's all. I didn't see anything. I don't know anything. He shook his head slowly, like he was disappointed. "You and I both know that's not true. You saw the transfer, you talked to Hollis, and now you've talked to Inez. That's 3 strikes, and in our line of work, 3 strikes means you're done." He moved his hand, reaching for whatever was at his hip, and I tensed, ready to run even though I knew it was pointless. But then, from somewhere behind me, I heard the sound of another engine, loud and unmistakable. A diesel, big and powerful, roaring down the access road toward us. The man's head snapped toward the sound, and for the first time I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. A wrecker truck burst into view, headlights blazing, and I recognized it immediately. Inez. She skidded to a stop between me and the SUV, blocking his line of sight, and leaned out the window. "Get in!" she shouted. "Now!" I didn't hesitate. I ran for the wrecker, yanked open the passenger door, and threw myself inside. Inez was already slamming the truck into reverse, engine screaming as she backed up at full speed. The man from the SUV was yelling something, moving toward us, but she didn't stop. She spun the wheel, whipped the wrecker around in a tight arc, and floored it back the way she'd come. I looked back through the rear window and saw the man running for his SUV, saw the headlights flare to life as he gave chase. "What the hell are you doing here?" I shouted over the engine noise. Inez's jaw was set, eyes locked on the road. "Saving your ass. I saw them pick up your trail outside Raceland. Figured they'd corner you somewhere quiet. I've been following both of you, waiting for the right moment." She took a hard turn, the wrecker's weight throwing us against the doors, and I heard the SUV's tires screeching behind us. "Hold on," she said, and I barely had time to brace before she slammed through a gap in a chain-link fence, tearing it open and plunging us into an unlit field. The wrecker bounced and jolted over uneven ground, headlights cutting wild arcs through the darkness. Behind us, the SUV tried to follow, but got caught on the fence, metal screeching as it struggled to break through. Inez didn't slow down. She navigated the field by instinct, weaving around obstacles I couldn't even see until we burst out onto another road on the far side. She turned hard, heading back toward the main highway, and finally, mercifully, the SUV's headlights disappeared from view. We drove in silence for several minutes, both of us breathing hard, adrenaline still surging. Then Inez spoke, her voice tight. "Did you call the number?" I nodded, reaching under the seat to retrieve the phone. The call was still connected, a timer showing almost 8 minutes. I brought it to my ear and heard a voice on the other end, calm and professional. "This is Agent Carver. If you can hear me, stay on the line. We're tracking this call. Help is coming." I closed my eyes, relief washing over me so powerfully I thought I might pass out. "We're here," I said into the phone. "We're both here, and we need help." The voice on the other end responded immediately. "Understood. I need you to get to a public location, somewhere with witnesses and security cameras. Can you do that?" I looked at Inez and she nodded. "There's a truck stop about 10 miles north on Highway 90. Big place, lots of cameras, always busy." I relayed that to Agent Carver, and he confirmed. Get there and wait. Do not leave. Do not engage with anyone who approaches you. Federal units are already en route. ETA 20 minutes. The line stayed open, and I kept the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the faint sound of crosstalk and radio chatter on the other end, proof that help was really coming. Inez drove us to the truck stop, and we pulled into the brightest, most populated section of the lot. We stayed in the wrecker, doors locked, engine running, and waited. True to his word, Agent Carver kept the line open, talking us through every minute, keeping us calm, and exactly 20 minutes later, 3 black SUVs with federal plates rolled into the lot, lights flashing. Agents in tactical gear poured out, securing the perimeter, and one of them, a lean man in his 40s with sharp eyes, approached the wrecker. I rolled down the window and he held up a badge. "Burrow Faulkner, Inez Thibodeau, I'm Agent Carver. You're safe now." The Federal Safe House was a nondescript ranch-style building 40 minutes outside New Orleans, tucked back on a gravel road with no signage and surrounded by oak trees draped in Spanish moss. Agent Carver drove us there himself, following a route that doubled back on itself 3 times to make sure we weren't being tailed. Inez sat in the back seat staring out the window in silence, and I kept my hands folded in my lap, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 12 hours. My rig was still parked at that truck stop, and part of me worried I'd never see it again. But that seemed like a small concern compared to staying alive. Inside, the safe house was sparse but functional. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with outdated appliances, and a living room with heavy curtains drawn across every window. 2 more agents were already there, a woman in her 30s who introduced herself as Agent Millard, and a younger man who didn't offer his name, just nodded and went back to monitoring a bank of laptops set up on the dining table. Carver gestured for us to sit on the couch, and he pulled up a chair across from us, a digital recorder in his hand. "I know you've both been through hell tonight," he said, his voice calm and professional, the kind of tone designed to put witnesses at ease. "But I need to get your statements while everything's fresh. Every detail matters, no matter how small it seems. We've been trying to build a case against this network for 3 years, and what you've given us tonight might finally be enough to move forward." Inez spoke first, her voice flat and exhausted, and she laid it all out. The names she knew, the routes they used, the transfers she'd helped facilitate. She described the hierarchy as best she understood it, with Hollis Boudreaux at the operational level and unnamed figures higher up the chain, parish officials whose names she'd only heard in passing. She talked about the payments, cash delivered in plain envelopes, always at odd hours, always with the unspoken understanding that questions weren't welcome. And she confirmed what she'd told me earlier, that drivers who became problems tended to have accidents, permanent ones. Carver listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When it was my turn, I walked him through everything from the moment I'd moved that barricade. The clearing, the crates, Hollis's threats, the phone call, the meeting at the diner, and finally the chase that had ended with federal intervention. Carver recorded it all, asked clarifying questions, pushed for specifics about times and locations and anything I could remember about the vehicles and people involved. By the time I finished, it was past midnight, and I felt hollowed out, like I'd given away pieces of myself just by speaking the words aloud. Carver shut off the recorder and leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "This is good, really good. We can corroborate a lot of this with surveillance we've already gathered, and your testimony gives us probable cause to start making arrests. But I need you both to understand something." He looked at each of us in turn, his expression grave. "The people you're up against, they have reach. Not just locally, but potentially into state systems, maybe even federal. We'll do everything we can to protect you, but there are no guarantees." You're going to be living under protection for weeks, maybe months, while we dismantle this thing. And even after that, your lives won't be the same. You'll need new identities, relocation, the works. Are you prepared for that?" Inez nodded without hesitation, like she'd already accepted that her old life was over. I took longer to answer, thinking about what I'd be giving up. 22 years on the road, the freedom to go where I wanted, the anonymity that had been my armor against the world, all of it gone, traded for safety, and the slim hope that the system would actually hold up its end of the bargain. But what choice did I have? Hollis, and whoever he worked for, had already marked me. If I walked away now, if I tried to disappear on my own, I'd spend whatever time I had left waiting for them to find me. At least this way, I had a chance. "Yeah," I said finally. "I'm prepared." Carver nodded, satisfied. "Good. We'll start the process in the morning. For tonight, get some rest. You're safe here." But I didn't feel safe. Even with federal agents in the next room, even with locks on the doors and curtains blocking the windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, that the walls were too thin, the distance too short. I lay on the bed in the spare room, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the old house settling around me. Every creak, every distant noise made my heart race. I kept replaying the moment that man had stepped out of the SUV, the cold certainty in his eyes, the way he'd moved toward me like he had all the time in the world. If Inez hadn't shown up when she did, I'd be dead. And the thought that kept circling back, gnawing at me, was that he'd found me so easily. Less than 2 hours after I'd left the diner, he was on me. That meant they had resources I couldn't even comprehend. Eyes everywhere, information flowing in real time. Around 2 in the morning, I heard voices in the living room, low and urgent. I got up, cracked the door open, and listened. It was Carver and Millard, talking in hushed tones, and I caught fragments of the conversation. "Check the call logs. Boudreaux made contact with someone in the state AG's office. They know we have them." Millard's response was too quiet to hear, but Carver's reply was clear. "We move up the timeline, start making arrests tonight before they have a chance to scatter. I'll call it in now." The urgency in his voice sent a chill through me. If they were accelerating the operation, it meant the window was closing faster than anyone had anticipated. And it also meant that Hollis and his network were already responding, already shifting pieces on the board. I went back to bed but didn't sleep, just lay there in the dark, listening to the sound of cars coming and going outside, agents mobilizing, the machinery of justice grinding into motion. I thought about Inez in the other room, wondered if she was sleeping or if she was lying awake like me, caught between relief and dread. We'd done the right thing, I kept telling myself. We'd brought this to the people who could stop it. But right and wrong felt like abstract concepts now, flimsy shields against the weight of what we'd set in motion. Because even if the feds arrested Hollis, even if they dismantled the network and locked up everyone involved, there would always be the question of who we'd missed. The names Inez didn't know, the connections that ran deeper than anyone realized, and those people, whoever they were, wouldn't forget. Morning came slowly, gray light filtering through the curtains, and with it came the sound of activity in the house. I got up, splashed water on my face in the small bathroom, and walked out to the living room. Carver was there, looking like he hadn't slept at all, phone pressed to his ear and a laptop open in front of him. He ended the call when he saw me and gestured for me to sit. "We made the first arrests an hour ago," he said. "Hollis Boudreaux was taken into custody at his home. No resistance. We also picked up 3 other deputies and 2 parish administrators. They're being processed now." I felt a flicker of something, relief maybe, or vindication. But it was muted, dulled by exhaustion and the knowledge that this was just the beginning. "What about the people higher up?" I asked. "The ones Inez didn't know about?" Carver's expression tightened. "We're working on it. Hollis isn't talking yet, but he will. They always do once they realize how deep the charges go. Conspiracy, trafficking, accessory to murder. He's looking at life without parole, and that's a strong motivator to cooperate. We'll get the rest of them." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that the system would work, that justice would be served. But I'd seen too much, heard too much to take it on faith. "What about us?" I asked. "What happens to me and Inez now?" Carver leaned back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You'll stay here until we finish debriefing. Another few days at least. After that, witness protection protocols kick in. New names, new locations, new lives. It's not ideal, but it's the best option we have. The people you're testifying against, they have long memories and deep pockets. Even with them behind bars, there's always the risk of retaliation from associates we haven't identified yet. So, we relocate you, give you the tools to start over, and monitor the situation." I nodded, accepting it because I had no other choice. But the thought of starting over, of walking away from everything I'd built, everything I knew, felt like a kind of death. A necessary one, maybe, but a death nonetheless. "Can I ask you something?" I said. Carver gestured for me to go ahead. "The driver accidents Inez mentioned, the ones that were really murders, how many were there?" He hesitated, and I could see him weighing how much to tell me. Finally, he sighed. "We've identified 7 cases over the past 3 years that fit the pattern. Staged accidents, mechanical failures, drivers disappearing on remote routes. There might be more, cases we haven't connected yet, but 7 that we're confident were homicides. 7 people who'd seen something they shouldn't have, asked the wrong questions, refused to stay quiet, and they'd paid for it with their lives." I thought about how close I'd come to being number 8, how easily I could have ended up as just another name on a memorial wall, another cautionary tale about the dangers of the road. "Did any of them have families?" I asked, not sure why it mattered, but needing to know. Carver nodded slowly. "Most of them did. We've been working with the families, trying to give them closure, but it's complicated. Hard to tell someone their loved one was murdered when the official record says accident. But yeah, they had people who cared about them, people who deserved to know the truth." The weight of that settled over me, and I felt a surge of anger, not just for myself, but for those 7 drivers and their families, for everyone who'd been caught in the machinery of this network and ground down because a few corrupt officials decided Wush's cited profit was worth more than human lives. I stood up, needing to move, to do something with the energy building inside me. "I want to testify," I said, "not just in a deposition or a closed hearing. I want to stand in front of a jury and tell them everything. I want Hollis and everyone else involved to hear it, to know that what they did didn't stay buried." Carver studied me for a moment, then nodded. "We'll make that happen. When the time comes, you'll have your chance." The next few days blurred together. More debriefings, more questions, agents coming and going with updates on the arrests and the expanding investigation. Inez and I spent most of our time in separate rooms, each of us processing what had happened in our own way. Occasionally we'd cross paths in the kitchen or the hallway, exchange a few words, but there wasn't much to say. We'd survived, and that was enough for now. On the 4th day, Carver pulled me aside and told me they were ready to move us to the next phase. Temporary housing in different cities, far from Louisiana, while the prosecution built its case. I'd be assigned a handler, someone who'd check in regularly and help me navigate the transition. It all sounded clinical, efficient, like I was a piece of evidence being moved into storage. The night before we were supposed to leave, I couldn't sleep again. I sat in the dark living room staring at nothing when Inez appeared in the doorway. She looked as worn out as I felt, shadows under her eyes and her hair pulled back in a messy knot. She sat down on the other end of the couch, and for a while neither of us spoke. Then, quietly, she said, "Do you think it was worth it?" I turned to look at her, trying to read her expression in the dim light. "What do you mean?" She gestured vaguely, encompassing everything. All of this. The running, the fear, giving up our lives. "Do you think it'll actually change anything? Or are we just fooling ourselves?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. And the honest answer was, I didn't know. The arrests were real, the evidence was solid, and the feds seemed committed to seeing it through. But I also knew that systems like the one we'd exposed didn't just disappear. They adapted, found new routes, new people, new ways to operate. Cutting off one head didn't kill the beast. It just made it more cautious. "I think," I said slowly, "that we did the only thing we could. Maybe it changes everything. Maybe it doesn't. But at least we didn't stay quiet. At least we didn't let them get away with it without a fight." Inez nodded, and I saw something shift in her expression, a kind of resigned acceptance. "Yeah, I guess that'll have to be enough." The next morning, we were separated. Inez went with Agent Millard, heading west to a city she wouldn't name, and I went with Carver, heading north. We didn't say goodbye, just a brief nod as we climbed into separate vehicles, an acknowledgement of what we'd been through, and the understanding that we'd probably never see each other again. The safe house disappeared in the rearview mirror, and with it the last physical connection to everything that had happened. Carver drove in silence for a while, letting me sit with my thoughts, and eventually we hit the interstate, blending into the flow of traffic like we were just another car going somewhere ordinary. "There's something you should know," Carver said after about an hour. I looked at him, already bracing for bad news. "We got word this morning that Hollis Boudreau made bail." My blood ran cold. "What? How is that possible? You said he was looking at life without parole." Carver's jaw tightened. Someone high up pulled strings. We're not sure who yet, but his bail was posted by a law firm out of Baton Rouge, one with connections to state government. It's unusual, especially given the severity of the charges, but it's legal. He's out, with an ankle monitor and travel restrictions, but he's out. I felt the ground shift beneath me. The fragile sense of security I'd been building shattered in an instant. So, he's free. He knows I testified, he knows where this is going, and he's free. Carver glanced at me, and I could see the frustration in his eyes. He doesn't know where you are, and he won't. The protection protocols are solid, but yes, it complicates things. We're pushing for the trial to be expedited, trying to get him back in custody on additional charges, but it's going to take time. Time. The one thing I didn't feel like I had. Because if Hollis was out, if he had access to resources and information, then no amount of distance or new identity would make me truly safe. He'd proven how far his reach extended, how quickly he could mobilize. And now he had motivation, a personal stake in making sure I never made it to that witness stand. We drove for another 3 hours, stopping only once for gas, and eventually pulled up to a small apartment complex in a mid-sized city I'd never been to before. Carver handed me a folder with my new identity, a driver's license, social security card, and a bank account with enough money to get me started. "Your name is Thomas Landry now," he said. "You've got a job lined up at a logistics company, basic warehouse work. Nothing that'll draw attention. Your handler will check in twice a week, and if you need anything, there's a number in the folder. Don't use your old phone. Don't contact anyone from your past. and don't deviate from the routine we've set up. The more invisible you are, the safer you'll be. I took the folder, feeling the weight of the new name, the new life. Thomas Landry. It sounded wrong, foreign, like a costume that didn't fit. But I nodded, thanked Carver, and climbed out of the car. He drove away without ceremony, and I stood there in the parking lot, staring at the apartment building that was supposed to be my fresh start. It looked generic, forgettable, exactly the kind of place where someone could disappear. I walked inside, found the unit number on the paperwork, and let myself in. The apartment was furnished but impersonal, a couch and a bed and a table. Nothing that suggested anyone actually lived there. I set the folder down, sat on the couch, and tried to imagine what my life would look like now. Warehouse shifts, quiet evenings, a routine designed to keep me alive but not necessarily living. Days turned into weeks. I went to work, kept my head down, and followed the protocols exactly as instructed. My handler, a woman who called herself Agent Torres, checked in like clockwork, always asking the same questions. Any unusual activity? Anyone asking questions about you? Any sense that you're being watched? The answer was always no, but the questions themselves kept me on edge. A constant reminder that the threat was still out there, lurking just beyond the edges of my carefully controlled existence. I tried to settle into the rhythm, to accept that this was my life now, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being adrift. I'd spent 22 years with a purpose, a routine that made sense. Now I was just marking time, waiting for a trial that kept getting delayed, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then, 8 weeks into my new life, it did. I came home from a shift to find the door to my apartment slightly ajar. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I forced myself to think. Could be maintenance, could be the landlord, could be nothing. But I knew better. I pulled out my phone, dialed Torres, and waited. She answered on the second ring. "What's wrong?" I kept my voice low. My door's open. I didn't leave it that way. There was a pause. Then her voice came back, sharper. "Get out of there, now. Don't go inside. Don't grab anything, just leave. I'm sending a team." I backed away from the door, moving quickly toward the stairs, but before I could reach them I heard footsteps inside the apartment. Slow, deliberate, like someone had been waiting. I ran down the stairs, through the lobby, out into the parking lot. I didn't look back, didn't stop until I was 2 blocks away, hiding in the doorway of a closed shop, phone still pressed to my ear. Torres was talking, telling me to find a public place, to stay visible, that help was coming. But I couldn't focus on her words, because I knew what this meant. They'd found me. Despite the new name, the new city, the protocols, they'd found me. And if they could find me once, they could find me again. The protection, the promises, the fresh start. It was all an illusion. I was never going to be safe. Not really. Not as long as Hollis and the people behind him were out there, with the resources to track me down and the will to see it through. Federal agents arrived within 20 minutes, swept the apartment, and confirmed what I already knew. Someone had been inside. They'd gone through my things, left no obvious signs of tampering, but the message was clear. "We know where you are. We can reach you anytime we want." Torres relocated me again, this time to an even more remote location, a small town where I was supposed to blend in as just another face in the crowd. But the damage was done. The illusion of safety had been shattered, and no matter how many times they moved me, no matter how many new names they gave me, I knew the truth. I was being hunted, and the only question that mattered was how long I could stay ahead. The trial finally started 6 months after that first night on the Bayou Road. I sat in a hotel room under guard, watching the news coverage, seeing Hollis Boudreau in a suit and tie, looking every bit the respectable public servant wrongly accused. The prosecutors laid out the evidence, called witnesses, presented the recordings and documents that painted a picture of corruption stretching across multiple parishes. And when it was my turn to testify, they transported me to the courthouse in an armored vehicle, surrounded by federal agents, and I walked into that courtroom knowing it might be the last thing I ever did. I took the stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. And then I told them everything, every detail, every moment, every threat. I looked Hollis Boudreau in the eye as I spoke, and I saw nothing there. No anger, no fear, just cold calculation, like he was already planning his next move. The defense tried to discredit me, painted me as a disgruntled driver with a grudge, but the evidence backed me up. The recordings, the federal surveillance, Inez's testimony from a remote location, it all fit together. When I stepped down from the stand, I felt a strange kind of emptiness, like I'd given away the last piece of myself and had nothing left. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they came back, the verdict was guilty on all counts. Hollis Boudreau was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison, and the others involved received similar sentences. It should have felt like victory, like justice, but all I felt was tired, because I knew that even with Hollis behind bars, the network wasn't dead. There were still people out there, people whose names had never come up in the trial, people with the resources to keep hunting me if they decided I was worth the effort. And there was no way to know if they had. I was back in witness protection within hours of the verdict, relocated for the 3rd time, given another new name, another fresh start. But I don't sleep easy anymore. Every sound in the night makes me reach for the phone. Every unfamiliar face makes me wonder if this is it, if this is the moment they catch up. I think about Inez sometimes, wonder if she's out there somewhere, living under a different name, looking over her shoulder the way I do. I think about those 7 drivers whose deaths were written off as accidents, about their families who'll never get the closure they deserve, even with the convictions. And I think about the choice I made that night when I moved that barricade, the choice that set all of this in motion. Would I do it differently if I could go back? I don't know. Maybe ignorance would have been safer. Maybe I'd still be on the road, driving my routes, living my life, never knowing what I'd narrowly avoided. But I also know that some things, once you see them, you can't unsee, and once you know, you can't unknow. You either act or you carry the weight of your silence forever. So here I am, Thomas Landry, or whatever name comes next, working a job I don't care about in a town I'll never call home, waiting for the day when someone knocks on my door and I have to run again. The trial's over, the convictions are in, but the story doesn't end. It just keeps going, stretching out into an uncertain future where the only constant is the knowledge that I'm not free. I never will be. Because the road I drove down that stormy September night didn't just lead me through a bayou. It led me into something I can't escape, something that follows me no matter how far I run or how many times I change my name. And late at night, when the fear creeps in and I can't sleep, I wonder if Hollis Boudreau, sitting in his cell, is thinking the same thing I am. That this isn't over. That it never really ends. That somewhere out there in the deep parishes and the dark backroads of Louisiana, the network is still running. Still moving product, still eliminating threats, still protected by people whose names we'll never know. And that one day, when they decide I'm too much of a risk, when they decide the cost of silence is worth more than the cost of my life, they'll come for me, and no amount of federal protection will stop them. I keep a bag packed by the door, always ready to move, always ready to run, because that's what my life is now, a constant state of flight, a shadow existence in the margins of a world that moved on without me. The trucking life, the freedom of the open road, the solitude I used to treasure, it's all gone, replaced by this. Fear, vigilance, and the bitter knowledge that doing the right thing cost me everything. But I'd do it again. Even knowing how it ends, even knowing I'd lose it all, I'd still move that barricade. I'd still make that call. Because some roads, once you start down them, you have to see through to the end, no matter where they lead. "17 years on the road teaches you things most people never learn. How to read weather patterns before the forecasters even mention them. How to tell the difference between engine trouble and just the normal sounds of a rig carrying 20 tons. How to survive on truck stop coffee and whatever's wrapped in plastic under heat lamps at 3 in the morning. But most importantly, it teaches you to trust your instincts, especially when everything looks fine on the surface. Because, in this business, the moment you ignore that voice in your gut telling you something's wrong is usually the moment everything goes sideways. It was late March 2024, and I was running a load of agricultural equipment from Memphis down toward Jackson. Standard route, nothing complicated, just state highways cutting through the Delta Flatlands. The kind of drive where you can see for miles in every direction. Nothing but cotton fields and scattered farmhouses and the occasional gas station clinging to a crossroads like it's the last outpost of civilization. The weather had been threatening all day, that heavy gray sky that sits low and makes everything feel compressed, like the world's holding its breath waiting for something to break. By early afternoon, the radio was warning about flash flood potential across 3 counties, advising drivers to seek alternate routes and avoid low-lying areas. I'd been through Delta floods before, seen water rise so fast it turns roads into rivers in less than an hour. The land out here is flat, almost unnaturally so, and when the rain comes it has nowhere to go except sideways, spreading across fields and highways and anything else in its path. I checked my route, saw I had about 40 miles before I hit the worst of the potential flood zone, and made the call to push through. If I could clear that section before the heavy rain hit, I'd be fine. If not, I'd be stuck waiting it out in some roadside lot for hours, maybe longer. Time is money in this business, and I had a delivery window to meet. So I kept the accelerator steady and watched the sky darken ahead of me. The rain started around 2:30, just a light drizzle at first, the kind that fogs up your windshield and makes the road slick but manageable. Within 10 minutes it escalated, heavy drops hammering the cab and cutting visibility down to maybe 50 yards. I slowed to 45, then 40, leaning forward to peer through the windshield even with the wipers going full speed. The ditches on either side of the road were already filling, muddy water churning and rising, creeping toward the asphalt. I passed a few cars headed the other direction, headlights cutting through the downpour, and noticed most of them were moving fast, like they were trying to outrun what was coming. Smart. I should have done the same, should have turned around and found higher ground. But I'd already committed, and the highway ahead still looked passable. Then I felt it. A sharp jolt that ran through the whole rig, followed by a grinding sound from somewhere underneath. I eased off the gas immediately, heart sinking because I knew that sound. Axle trouble, maybe a broken mount or a cracked housing. Nothing catastrophic yet, but bad enough that I couldn't ignore it. I rolled another half-mile, looking for a safe place to pull over, and spotted a turnoff ahead marked by a faded sign that read, Puckett Service and Repair. The building sat about 100 yards off the main road, a low cinder block structure with a sagging roof and a gravel lot that was already turning to mud. Not exactly the kind of place you'd choose under normal circumstances, but normal had stopped applying the moment that axle made that noise. I turned in carefully, feeling the rig list slightly to one side as I rolled across the gravel, and came to a stop near the front of the building. The rain was relentless now, sheeting down so hard I could barely see the structure through the windshield. I grabbed my rain jacket, pulled it over my head, and climbed down into the storm. Within seconds, I was soaked, water running down my neck and into my boots as I jogged toward the building. The front door was propped open with a cinder block, and I ducked inside, dripping onto a concrete floor stained with decades of oil and grease. The interior was exactly what you'd expect from a roadside mechanic shop that had been here since before I was born. Tool benches cluttered with wrenches and sockets, a couple of hydraulic lifts that looked like they might collapse if you sneezed near them, and walls covered in old calendars and handwritten notes pinned to pegboard. The air smelled like motor oil and cigarettes and something else, something faintly chemical that I couldn't place. There was no one in sight, but I could hear movement from somewhere in the back, metal clanging against metal, and the low murmur of a radio playing classic country. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing slightly in the space. The noise stopped, and a moment later a man appeared from behind a stack of tires, wiping his hands on a rag that looked like it hadn't been clean in years. He was maybe 60, thin and wiry with a face that had seen too much sun and not enough sleep. His coveralls were stained in layers, old grease over older grease, and he had the kind of eyes that tracked you carefully, measuring, calculating. "Help you?" he asked, his voice flat and uninflected, like he'd said the same words 1,000 times and expected nothing good to come from them. I gestured toward the door, toward my rig sitting out in the rain. "Got an axle issue. Heard something break about 2 miles back. Limped in here hoping you could take a look." He stepped closer, glanced past me at the truck, and I saw something flicker in his expression, too brief to read, but there nonetheless. "Axle, huh? That's not a quick fix. Especially in this weather. You picked a hell of a time to break down." I shrugged, feeling water drip from my jacket onto the floor. "Didn't exactly plan it. Can you fix it or not?" He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, I can fix it. But it's gonna take time. Few hours at least, maybe longer depending on what's actually broken. And I can't even get under there to look until this rain lets up a bit. Ground's too soft, and I don't have a covered bay that'll fit a rig your size." I glanced out the door at the downpour, knowing he was right. The lot was already a mess, and trying to work in these conditions would be pointless. "How long you think the rain'll last?" He shrugged. "Radio says it might go all night. Flash flood warnings are up for the whole county. You're not going anywhere soon, even if I could fix it right now." I felt frustration building, but pushed it down. Getting angry wouldn't change the situation, and I'd been in worse spots before. "All right, what do you need from me?" He walked over to a cluttered desk in the corner, pulled out a grease-stained clipboard with a form attached, and handed it to me. "Fill this out. Make and model VN. Description of the problem. I'll get to it as soon as I can." I took the clipboard, scanned the form, and started filling it in. Standard stuff, the kind of paperwork every shop requires. But as I wrote, I noticed the man watching me, not overtly, just glances from the corner of his eye as he pretended to organize tools on a nearby bench. It felt off, that level of attention, like he was more interested in me than in the work I was bringing him. I finished the form, handed it back, and he set it on the desk without looking at it. "There's a waiting area in the back," he said, pointing toward a doorway I hadn't noticed. "Got a couch, coffee machine if you want it. Might as well make yourself comfortable. This is going to be a while." I nodded, thanked him, and walked toward the back room. It was small and dingy, with a sagging couch that looked like it had been salvaged from a curb and a coffee maker sitting on a folding table. The pot half full with liquid that might have been brewed this morning or last week. There was a window facing the lot, rain streaming down the glass in sheets, and I stood there for a moment just watching the water pool and spread, wondering how deep it would get before it started coming inside. I poured myself a cup of coffee, more out of habit than desire, and took a sip. It tasted like burnt rubber, but it was hot, and that was enough. I sat down on the couch, pulled out my phone, and checked for signal. 1 bar, barely enough to load anything. I tried calling dispatch to let them know I'd be delayed, but the call dropped twice before I gave up. I sent a text instead, hoping it would go through eventually, and then just sat there listening to the rain hammer against the roof and the distant sounds of the mechanic moving around in the shop. Time dragged. Minutes felt like hours, and I found myself staring at the same patch of water on the floor, watching it grow as a leak somewhere in the ceiling added to it drip by drip. Around 4 o'clock, the mechanic appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed. "Check the weather," he said. "This storm's gonna sit on us for a while. Roads are already starting to flood. You're stuck here tonight, no way around it." I looked at him, trying to read his expression, but it gave nothing away. "What about the repair?" He shrugged. "Can't do anything until morning at the earliest. Need daylight and dry ground to get under that rig safely. You got a place to sleep in your cab?" I nodded. "Yeah, I can manage." He tilted his head slightly, like he was considering something, then said, "Suit yourself. But if you change your mind, there's a cot in the storage room. Not much, but it's dry. Door locks from the inside if that makes you feel better." The offer felt strange. Too generous for a guy who'd barely said 10 words since I arrived. But I didn't see any harm in it, and sleeping in the cab during a storm like this wasn't exactly appealing. "I'll keep that in mind," I said. He nodded, pushed off the door frame, and disappeared back into the shop. I sat there for another hour, drinking bad coffee and listening to the storm, and as the light outside started to fade, I made the decision to move to the storage room. The cab would flood if the water kept rising, and at least inside I'd stay dry. The storage room was exactly what he'd described. A narrow space with concrete walls, a cot shoved against one side, and boxes of parts stacked everywhere else. There was a single overhead bulb hanging from a wire, and when I pulled the chain it flickered to life, casting harsh shadows across the room. I tested the door, confirmed it had a slide bolt on the inside, and felt marginally better. I set my jacket on a hook, kicked off my boots, and stretched out on the cot. It smelled like mildew and old canvas, but it was better than nothing. I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes the room was darker, the bulb dimmed or dying, and I could hear voices. Low, muffled, coming from somewhere beyond the door. I sat up slowly, listening. 2 people, maybe more, talking in tones that didn't carry words but carried tension. I slid off the cot, moved quietly to the door, and pressed my ear against it. The voices were clearer now, still indistinct but urgent, and I caught fragments. "Can't keep doing this," and "told you it was temporary," and then something that made my blood run cold. "Just another problem we don't need." I stepped back from the door, heart pounding, and tried to make sense of what I'd heard. Who were they talking about? Me? Someone else? And what did they mean by another problem? I thought about the mechanic's strange behavior, the way he'd watched me, the odd offer of the storage room. None of it had felt right. And now, listening to those voices, I realized I'd walked into something I didn't understand, something that might not let me walk back out. I moved back to the cot, sat down, and tried to think. The door was locked from the inside, so I was safe for now. But morning would come, and with it the expectation that I'd let the mechanic fix my rig and send me on my way. Except I didn't trust that anymore. I didn't trust him, didn't trust this place, and I definitely didn't trust the voices on the other side of that door. I needed to figure out what was happening here, and I needed to do it before I became whatever they meant by another problem. The rain continued through the night, relentless and oppressive, and I sat on that cot in the dark, listening to every sound, every creak of the building, every footstep that passed near my door. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice kept whispering the same question over and over. What have you gotten yourself into? I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I started to drift off, a sound would pull me back. Footsteps in the hallway, the creak of a door opening somewhere in the building, voices that rose and fell like they were arguing about something they couldn't quite resolve. I kept the bolt locked and stayed on that cot, fully dressed, boots within arm's reach, ready to move if I needed to. The rain never let up, just pounded against the roof in a steady rhythm that should have been soothing, but instead felt like a countdown, each drop marking time until something happened. Around 5 in the morning, when the sky was just starting to show the barest hint of gray through the single high window in the storage room, I heard the shop door open and close. Heavy footsteps crossed the concrete floor, deliberate and unhurried, and then stopped right outside my door. I sat up slowly, watching the door handle, waiting to see if it would turn. It didn't. Instead, there was a knock, 3 sharp raps that echoed in the small space. "You awake in there?" It was Talmadge Puckett's voice, flat and neutral, giving nothing away. I cleared my throat, tried to sound casual. "Yeah, I'm up." "Rain's letting up some, still coming down, but not like last night. I can get under your rig now, see what we're dealing with." I stood up, slid the bolt back, and opened the door. Talmadge stood there in the same stained coveralls, looking like he hadn't slept either. His eyes were bloodshot, and there was a tension in his jaw that hadn't been there yesterday. Behind him, the shop was dim, lit only by the weak morning light filtering through grimy windows. "How long you think it'll take?" I asked. He shrugged. "Depends on what's broken. Could be an hour, could be all day. Won't know until I get eyes on it." I nodded, following him out into the main shop area. The smell hit me again, that mix of oil and chemicals, but this time it was stronger, more pungent, like something had been disturbed or moved during the night. Talmadge grabbed a flashlight and a toolbox, gestured for me to follow, and we headed out into the drizzle. The lot was a disaster, half submerged in muddy water that came up past my ankles, and my rig sat there like an island in the middle of it all. He waded over to the driver's side, dropped to his knees in the muck without hesitation, and disappeared underneath. I stood there getting soaked, watching the water ripple around my boots, and tried to shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced back at the shop, scanned the windows but saw nothing, just my paranoia working overtime, fueled by a sleepless night and those voices I'd heard. Talmadge was under there for maybe 10 minutes before he slid back out, covered in mud and grease, shaking his head. "You got a cracked axle housing. Not catastrophic, but it's leaking fluid and it's only going to get worse. I can patch it, get you mobile enough to limp to a real shop, but it's going to take time. Need to drain the housing, clean it, apply sealant, let it cure. We're looking at 6, maybe 8 hours minimum." 6 to 8 hours. The words hung in the air between us and I felt my stomach tighten. I didn't want to be here that long, didn't want to spend another minute in this place, but I also didn't have a choice. Driving on a cracked housing would destroy the axle completely, leave me stranded on some flooded highway with no help coming. "Do what you need to do," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. He nodded, stood up, and wiped his hands on his coveralls. "I'll get started. Might want to find somewhere dry to wait. This is going to be messy." I watched him head back toward the shop, then looked around the lot. Across the road, maybe a quarter-mile through the trees, I could see another building, low and white with a faded red cross painted on the side, some kind of clinic or medical facility, though it looked as abandoned as everything else out here. Talmadge noticed me looking and spoke over his shoulder. That's the county health outpost, still operational, technically, though they only staff it a couple days a week. Nurse comes by, handles minor stuff, sends anything serious to the hospital in town. I filed that information away. Not sure why it mattered, but feeling like everything mattered now. Every detail a potential piece of a puzzle I didn't fully understand. I followed Talmadge back into the shop, watched him gather supplies, and then retreated to the waiting area. The coffee was still there, still terrible, but I poured another cup and stood by the window, staring out at the rain-soaked landscape. The flooding had receded slightly, but the roads were still impassable, dark water covering the asphalt in both directions. Even if my rig was fixed right now, I wouldn't be going anywhere for hours. Time crawled. I tried my phone again, got a weak signal long enough to check messages, and saw 3 missed calls from dispatch and a handful of texts asking for updates. I sent back a brief explanation. Broken axle, stuck at repair shop, will update when mobile, and watched the message struggle to send before finally going through. Then the signal dropped again, and I was back to sitting in silence listening to the distant sounds of Talmadge working, and the rain tapping against the windows. Around 9, I heard a vehicle pull into the lot, tires splashing through puddles, and I moved to the window to look. It was a small SUV, white and mud-splattered, with a dented bumper and a parking sticker on the windshield that I couldn't make out from this distance. The driver's door opened, and a woman climbed out, middle-aged, wearing scrubs under a rain jacket and carrying a canvas bag over her shoulder. She moved with purpose, walking quickly toward the shop entrance, and I heard the front door open and close. Voices followed, low and brief, Talmadge's and hers, and then footsteps approaching the waiting area. She appeared in the doorway, looked at me with tired but sharp eyes, and gave a small nod. "You must be the driver with the broken axle. Talmadge mentioned you were here." I stood up, trying to read her, trying to figure out if she was part of whatever was happening here or just someone passing through. "That's me, Hoyt Renfro." She stepped into the room, set her bag on the folding table, and extended a hand. "Leota McRaney, I'm the county nurse, work out of the clinic across the way. Talmadge called me this morning, said you might need somewhere more comfortable to wait while he works. Figured I'd check in, see if you needed anything. Medical attention, food, whatever." Her tone was professional, almost clinical, but there was something underneath it. A weariness that felt familiar, like she'd seen too much and had learned to keep it all at arm's length. I shook her hand, noted the strength in her grip, the calluses that spoke of years doing hands-on work. "I'm all right, thanks. Just waiting it out." She studied me for a moment, eyes flicking over my face like she was assessing more than just my physical state. "You don't look all right. You look like you didn't sleep, and you're about 2 seconds from walking out that door and taking your chances on foot." Her bluntness caught me off guard, and I found myself almost smiling despite everything. Is it that obvious? She shrugged, pulled out a chair, and sat down without invitation. "I've been doing this job for 20 years. I know what fear looks like, and you've got it written all over you. So what's going on? Talmadge do something to spook you, or is it just the situation?" I hesitated, weighing how much to say. She could be trustworthy, could be someone who'd help if I asked. Or she could be part of whatever network was operating here, another piece of the machine keeping things running smooth and quiet. But something about her, the directness, the lack of pretense, made me want to trust her. "I heard voices last night," I said carefully. "People talking in the shop. Couldn't make out much, but enough to know something's off about this place. And Talmadge, He's been watching me like I'm a problem he needs to solve. Leota's expression didn't change, but I saw her hands tighten slightly on the armrests of her chair. What exactly did you hear? I recounted the fragments, the mentions of problems and temporary situations, and watched her face for any sign of recognition. She sat quietly for a moment, then stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the flooded lot. When she spoke, her voice was lower, more guarded. You stumbled into something you shouldn't have, and now you're stuck here until that axle's fixed, which means you're a liability. They're going to have to decide what to do about you. The casual way she said it, like it was a foregone conclusion, sent ice through my veins. Who's they? What are you talking about? She turned back to me, and I saw something in her eyes, resignation mixed with what might have been guilt. This place, this whole area, it's not what it looks like. Talmadge runs more than just a repair shop. He's part of a setup, a network that uses places like this to move things that shouldn't be moved. Medical supplies, mostly. Stolen or diverted from hospitals and clinics, stuff that's supposed to go to patients but ends up sold on the black market instead. Painkillers, surgical equipment, anything with value. I felt the pieces starting to come together, the strange atmosphere, the voices, the way Talmadge had been so eager to keep me here. And you? You're part of it? Leota shook her head slowly. I was. For a while, I didn't have a choice. They approached me years ago, said they needed someone with access to supply chains, someone who could look the other way when shipments came up short. I was drowning in debt, my ex had cleaned me out, and I needed the money. So I did it. I falsified records, signed off on inventory that never existed, helped them build a pipeline. But I'm done now. I've been trying to get out for months, but they don't just let you walk away. The weight of what she was telling me settled over the room, and I realized just how deep this went. It wasn't just Talmadge, it was a system, organized and entrenched, using rural isolation and economic desperation to keep people complicit. Why are you telling me this? I asked. She looked at me directly, and I saw the exhaustion in her face, the toll of years carrying secrets. Because you're in danger. They can't let you leave knowing what you know, even if you don't realize what you know yet. And because maybe if I help you, I can do one decent thing before this all comes crashing down. Before I could respond, the door to the waiting area swung open, and Talmadge stood there, grease-covered and unreadable. His eyes moved between Leota and me, lingering just a moment too long, and then he spoke. Leota, need you to look at something in the clinic. Got a delivery that came in overnight, needs your signature. It wasn't a request, it was a command. Leota nodded, grabbed her bag, and walked toward him. As she passed me, she leaned in slightly and whispered, barely audible, "Don't go anywhere. I'll be back." Then she was gone, following Talmadge out into the shop, and I was alone again. I stood there for a moment, processing everything she'd said, trying to figure out my next move. If she was telling the truth, if this place was a front for black market medical supplies, then I was sitting in the middle of a criminal operation with no way out until my rig was fixed. And if Talmadge and whoever else was involved decided I was a threat, I wouldn't make it to that repair being finished. I needed leverage, needed information, needed something that would give me a chance. I walked to the window, watched Leota and Talmadge cross the muddy lot toward the clinic, and made a decision. I was going to follow them. I waited until they disappeared inside the clinic, then slipped out of the waiting area and into the main shop. It was empty, tools scattered across benches, my rig visible through the open bay door with the axle housing exposed and dripping sealant. I moved quickly, quietly, across the shop floor and out the back door, into the rain. The ground was soft, every step sinking slightly, but I kept low and moved toward the tree line that separated the shop from the clinic. Within a minute, I was among the pines, using the trunks for cover, and I could see the clinic clearly now. It was a simple structure, a single story with barred windows and a metal door that looked reinforced. The white paint was peeling, and the red cross was so faded it was barely visible. But the building itself seemed solid, functional. I crept closer, staying in the trees, until I was near enough to see through one of the windows. The interior was lit by fluorescent lights, harsh and clinical, and I could see Leota and Talmadge standing near a desk, talking. There was someone else with them, a man I hadn't seen before, younger, maybe 30s, wearing a button-down shirt and jeans. He was gesturing emphatically, clearly agitated, and even from this distance I could see the tension in the room. I moved to a different angle, trying to get closer to the window, and that's when I saw them. Boxes, dozens of them, stacked against the far wall, each one labeled with medical supply company logos. Some were open, contents visible, vials and syringes, and packages of pills. This wasn't a clinic, it was a warehouse, a distribution point, and Leota was standing right in the middle of it, signing something on a clipboard while Talmadge watched. My stomach turned. She'd lied to me, or at least hadn't told me the whole truth. She said she was done, that she was trying to get out, but here she was, signing off on another delivery, playing her part in the machine. I started to back away, intending to return to the shop before they noticed I was gone, but my boot caught on a root and I stumbled, catching myself against a tree. The noise was small, barely audible over the rain, but it was enough. The man in the button-down turned toward the window, eyes scanning the tree line, and I froze. For a moment I thought he hadn't seen me, thought I'd gotten lucky. Then he pointed, said something to Talmadge, and all three of them moved toward the door. I ran. No time to think, no time to plan, just pure instinct driving me back through the trees toward the shop. I could hear them behind me, voices shouting, branches snapping as they gave chase. I burst out of the tree line, slipped in the mud, and went down hard, my knee slamming into the ground. Pain shot through my leg, but I forced myself up, limping toward the shop. I made it inside, slammed the door shut, and looked around frantically for something to barricade it with. There was nothing, just tools and benches too heavy to move quickly. The door flew open before I could do anything, and Talmadge stepped inside, not running, not even hurried, just walking with that same deliberate pace. The other man was right behind him, and Leota brought up the rear, her face unreadable. Talmadge looked at me, shook his head slowly, and spoke in that flat voice that somehow made everything worse. You just couldn't stay put, could you? Had to go poking around, had to see things that weren't your concern. I backed up, hands raised, trying to project calm even though my heart was hammering. I didn't see anything. I don't know what you're doing here, and I don't care. Just fix my rig and I'll be gone. Talmadge glanced at the other man, some silent communication passing between them, and then back at me. It's too late for that. You've seen the clinic, you've seen the inventory, and you've been asking questions. That makes you a problem, and we have a very specific way of dealing with problems out here. The man in the button-down stepped forward, and I saw he was holding something, a syringe, the kind used for injections. My blood went cold. What is that? Leota moved then, stepping between me and the other two, her voice sharp. No, we're not doing this, not like this. Talmadge's expression hardened. Leota, step aside. This isn't up for debate. She didn't move. I said no, he's just a driver. He doesn't know anything that matters, and I'm not going to help you disappear another person. I'm done. The room went silent except for the rain drumming on the roof. Talmadge stared at her, and I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, weighing options, deciding how to handle this new wrinkle. Finally, he spoke, voice colder than before. "You're making a mistake. You know what happens to people who don't cooperate." Leota's jaw tightened, but she held her ground. "I've been making mistakes for years. Maybe it's time I stopped." The man with the syringe looked at Talmadge, waiting for direction, and for a moment I thought this was it. Thought they'd go through her if they had to. But then Talmadge stepped back, raised his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. "Fine, have it your way. But this is on you, Leota. Whatever happens next, you own it." He turned and walked toward the door, the other man following, and they disappeared into the rain. I stood there shaking, adrenaline still flooding my system, and looked at Leota. She was staring at the door, face pale, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "We need to go. Right now." "Go where? My rig's not fixed. The roads are flooded." She cut me off. "Forget the rig. They just went to make a call. Get instructions from whoever runs this operation. When they come back, it won't just be talk. They'll finish what they started, and they'll make sure I can't interfere. We have maybe 10 minutes before that happens." I looked at her, saw the fear in her eyes, the certainty, and realized she was right. This wasn't just about me anymore. She'd burned her bridge, chosen a side, and now we were both targets. "Where do we go?" She grabbed my arm, pulled me toward the back of the shop. "There's an old logging road about half a mile into the woods. Floods don't reach it because it's on higher ground. My SUV can make it if we move fast. Come on." We ran through the shop, out to the back door, into the rain. Leota led the way, moving with a sureness that told me she'd thought about this before, planned for the possibility of needing to run. We reached her SUV, climbed in, and she started the engine without hesitation. The tires spun in the mud, caught traction, and we lurched forward, bouncing across the lot toward the tree line. I looked back at the shop, saw Talmadge and the other man emerging from the clinic, saw them start running toward us, but Leota was already hitting the gas, and we plunged into the woods. The SUV crashed through underbrush, branches scraping against the sides, and I gripped the dashboard, bracing myself as we bounced over roots and rocks. Leota drove like she knew every inch of this terrain, weaving between trees, avoiding the worst of the obstacles, and within minutes we'd put distance between us and the shop. But I knew it wasn't over. They'd follow. They'd find us. Because people like Talmadge didn't just let problems walk away. And now, thanks to Leota's intervention, we were both problems that needed solving. The logging road was exactly what Leota had promised. Higher ground that cut through dense pine forest like a scar, rutted and overgrown but passable. The SUV bounced and lurched over exposed roots and washboard sections, the suspension protesting with every impact. But we kept moving. Leota's hands were white-knuckled on the wheel, her eyes fixed straight ahead, and I could see the tension radiating off her in waves. Neither of us spoke for the first few minutes, both of us just processing what had happened, what we'd left behind, and what was coming next. Finally, when the shop had disappeared completely behind us and the only sound was the engine straining and the rain pattering against the windshield, I broke the silence. "Where does this road lead?" Leota didn't take her eyes off the path ahead. "Eventually connects to County Road 12, about 8 miles north of here. From there we can hit the state highway, get to a town big enough to have actual law enforcement. But it's going to take us at least an hour in these conditions, maybe more." An hour. I thought about Talmadge and that other man, about how quickly they could organize pursuit, about what resources they had at their disposal. "They're going to follow us." She nodded, jaw tight. "I know. Talmadge has people, connections. By now, he's already made calls, told them we're running. They'll set up roadblocks, or they'll just wait for us to surface somewhere. That's how this works out here. You can't just disappear, not when they've got eyes everywhere. The hopelessness in her voice was palpable, and I felt it settling over me too. The weight of being hunted in unfamiliar territory with no clear path to safety. So, what's the plan? We just drive until we get caught? She was quiet for a moment, navigating around a fallen branch, then said, "There's a place, about halfway to County Road 12, old hunting cabin my ex used to own. It's off the main path, hidden pretty well. We could hole up there for a few hours, let them search the obvious routes, then move when they're not expecting it." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than nothing. "You think it's still standing? Still usable?" She shrugged. "Haven't been there in 3 years, but it was solid timber construction. Should still be intact. And it's got a storm cellar, somewhere we can hide if we need to." A storm cellar. The thought of being underground, trapped in a confined space while they searched above, made my skin crawl. But if it came to that, if hiding was our only option, I'd take it over whatever Talmadge had planned for us back at that shop. "All right, get us there." The road deteriorated as we went deeper into the woods, the canopy overhead growing thicker and blocking what little light filtered through the clouds. It felt like driving into a tunnel, the world narrowing to just the path ahead, and the walls of trees pressing in on either side. I kept checking the side mirror, watching for headlights for any sign we were being followed, but saw nothing. Just rain and shadows, and the endless green of the Delta forest. After about 20 minutes, Leota slowed and turned onto what barely qualified as a trail, more of a gap between trees than an actual road. The SUV scraped against low-hanging branches, leaves and pine needles smearing across the windshield, and I had to trust that she knew where she was going because I couldn't see anything that looked like a path. Then, through the trees, I saw it. A small cabin, maybe 20 feet square, built from dark timber that had weathered to almost black. The roof was covered in moss and fallen branches, and one of the windows was cracked, but the structure looked intact. Leota pulled up as close as she could, killed the engine, and we sat there for a moment in the sudden quiet, just the rain and our breathing. "This is it," she said, already reaching for the door handle. "Let's get inside, see what we're working with." We climbed out into the rain, and I followed her to the front door. It was padlocked, but Leota pulled a key from her pocket, old and tarnished, and the lock opened with a rusty click. The door swung inward, hinges protesting, and we stepped into musty darkness. Leota pulled out her phone, turned on the flashlight, and swept it across the interior. The cabin was sparse. Just a single room with a wood stove in one corner, a cot against the wall, and a small table with 2 chairs. Dust covered everything, and there were signs of animals, droppings in the corners, chewed fabric on the cot. But it was dry, and it was shelter. "Storm cellars through there," Leota said, pointing to a trapdoor in the floor near the stove. I walked over, grabbed the iron ring, and pulled. The door lifted with a groan, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. I aimed my own phone's light down and saw a small space, maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, with earthen walls and a low ceiling supported by timber beams. Not comfortable, but defensible. "How long do you think we should stay here?" I asked. Leota moved to the window, peered out through the cracked glass. "Hour, maybe 2. Long enough for them to check the main roads and assume we went straight through. Then we move, take the back way to County Road 12. I nodded, lowered the trapdoor back into place, and looked around the cabin. There wasn't much to work with, no food, no supplies, just the bare bones of a shelter that hadn't been used in years. But it would do. I pulled one of the chairs away from the table, brushed off the dust, and sat down. Leota did the same, and for the first time since we'd fled the shop, we had a moment to breathe, to think. "Tell me about the operation," I said. "How deep does it go? Who else is involved?" She rubbed her face with both hands, exhaustion seeping through every movement. "It started small, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. Talmadge was approached by someone, I never knew who, someone with connections to hospital supply chains and a plan to divert high-value items. Painkillers mostly, opioids, the kind that sell for serious money on the street, but also surgical equipment, diagnostic tools, anything that could be resold to clinics that operate under the table. And they needed you because you had access," I said, filling in the blanks. She nodded. "I work county health, which means I interface with regional supply networks. I place orders, receive shipments, log inventory. It was easy to falsify records, make it look like we'd received less than we actually did, then pass the excess to Talmadge. He'd store it at the clinic, the one you saw, and distribute it through his network. Buyers would come in under the guise of needing vehicle repairs, pick up their product and leave. Clean, efficient, almost impossible to trace. I thought about the boxes I'd seen stacked in that clinic, the sheer volume of it. How much money are we talking about?" Leota's laugh was bitter, humorless, enough to keep a lot of people quiet. Talmadge was pulling in maybe $50,000 a month, and that was just his cut. Whoever's running the operation higher up, they're making 10 times that, maybe more. And it's not just this location. There are others scattered across the Delta, all using the same model. Rural isolation, economic desperation, and people like me who are willing to look the other way for a paycheck. The scope of it was staggering. This wasn't just a local scheme. It was a network, coordinated and sprawling, using the very infrastructure meant to help people as a pipeline for illegal goods. "Why didn't you go to the authorities?" I asked. "If you knew all this, why stay involved?" She looked at me, and I saw the shame in her eyes, the weight of complicity. Because I was scared. And because by the time I realized how deep it went, I was already in too far. They made sure of that. Gave me just enough rope to hang myself, made sure I signed documents, handled transactions, left a trail that would lead straight back to me if anyone ever investigated. I became insurance for them. If I talked, I'd go down too. So I kept quiet, kept playing my part, and told myself I'd find a way out eventually. She paused, swallowed hard. "But you don't get out of something like this, not unless you burn it all down." The rain picked up again, hammering against the roof, and I thought about my own situation. I'd stumbled into this by accident, a broken axle and bad timing, and now I was as deep in it as Leota. Maybe deeper, because I didn't have years of accumulated leverage, didn't have anything to trade except my silence. And they'd already made it clear that silence wasn't enough. "What happened to the others?" I asked. "The people who became problems before me." Leota went very still, her gaze dropping to the table. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "There have been 3 that I know of. Drivers, like you, who broke down in the wrong place at the wrong time. Saw things they shouldn't have, asked questions. Talmadge handled them." My blood went cold. Handled them how? She met my eyes, and I saw the answer there before she said it. They disappeared. Officially, they abandoned their rigs, walked off into the woods, never came back. Search parties found nothing. Cases went cold. But I know what really happened. I saw the records, the falsified medical reports that created alibis, the death certificates signed by a county coroner who's on the payroll. They were killed, Hoyt. Quietly, efficiently, and buried somewhere in these woods where no one would ever find them. The cabin felt smaller suddenly. the walls closing in, and I had to force myself to breathe. 3 drivers, 3 people who'd made the same mistake I had, who'd trusted the wrong mechanic, ended up in the wrong place. And they were dead, erased, their families probably still waiting for answers that would never come. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She looked at me directly. "Because you deserve to know what you're up against. And because if we're going to survive this, you need to understand that running isn't enough. We have to expose them, bring everything into the light, or they'll just keep hunting us until we're dead." Before I could respond, I heard it. Faint at first, almost lost in the sound of the rain, but growing louder. An engine. Multiple engines. Vehicles moving through the forest, not on the logging road, but somewhere close, sweeping the area. Leota heard it too, her head snapping toward the window. "They're here," she whispered. "They're searching for us." I moved to the window, staying low, and peered out through the crack in the glass. Through the trees, I could see lights, headlights cutting through the rain, moving slowly, methodically. 2 vehicles, maybe 3, spread out in a search pattern. They were hunting us, and they were getting close. "The storm cellar," Leota said, already moving toward the trap door. "Now." I helped her lift it, and we descended the ladder quickly, pulling the door shut above us. The darkness was absolute, suffocating, and I turned on my phone's flashlight, keeping it pointed at the ground to minimize the glow. We crouched in the cramped space, barely room to move, and listened. The engines grew louder, closer, and then one of them stopped. Right outside the cabin, I heard doors opening, footsteps on wet ground, voices muffled by the rain but clearly searching, calling out. "Check the cabin," someone said. It wasn't Talmadge's voice. This was someone else, someone I hadn't heard before. Footsteps crossed the porch, the door creaked open, and I held my breath. Above us, floorboards groaned under weight, and I could hear them moving through the cabin, opening the stove, checking behind the cot. My hand found Leota's in the darkness, and I felt her trembling, or maybe it was me. I couldn't tell anymore. The footsteps moved closer to the trap door, and I heard someone kick it lightly, testing it. "Locked from the outside," the voice said. "Nobody's down there." Relief flooded through me, and I realized Leota must have locked the trapdoor when we came in, a precaution I hadn't even noticed. The footsteps retreated, the door closed, and the engine started again. We waited, motionless, as the sounds faded, the vehicles moving deeper into the forest. We stayed in that cellar for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, making sure they were really gone before we risked moving. When we finally climbed back up, the cabin was empty, undisturbed, and the forest outside was quiet again, except for the rain. Leota closed the trap door, locked it from the outside again, and we stood there in the dim light, both of us shaking from adrenaline and relief. "That was too close," I said. She nodded. "They'll widen the search, check other locations. We need to move now, while we still can." We left the cabin, climbed back into the SUV, and Leota started the engine. But as she put it in gear, there was a grinding sound, a metallic screech that made my stomach drop. She tried again, and the engine revved, but the vehicle didn't move. "What's wrong?" I asked, already knowing it was bad. She climbed out, walked around to the rear, and I followed. The back tire was flat, completely shredded, torn apart like something had ripped through it. Leota knelt down, examined it, and pulled out a spike strip, a portable one, the kind police use to stop fleeing vehicles. She held it up, face pale. "They found us. They were here, and they sabotaged the SUV." Panic surged through me. If they'd been here, If they knew we were in the cabin and had disabled our vehicle, then this was a trap. They were waiting for us to come out, waiting to finish what they'd started. "We need to go back inside," I said. "Lock ourselves in. Call for help." Leota shook her head. "No signal out here, remember? And if we lock ourselves in, we're just making it easier for them. We need to move, on foot, get to County Road 12 any way we can." I looked at the forest, dark and endless, and knew she was right. Staying here was suicide. We had to run. We grabbed what little we had, my phone, Leota's medical bag, and started moving through the trees, away from the cabin, deeper into the woods. The rain made everything slippery, mud sucking at our boots, and within minutes we were both soaked and struggling. Leota led the way, moving with a determination born of desperation, and I followed, trying to keep up, trying not to think about what would happen if they found us out here. We'd been walking maybe 10 minutes when I heard the engines again, closer this time, and saw lights sweeping through the trees behind us. They were coming. "Run," Leota said, and we did. We crashed through underbrush, branches whipping at our faces, roots trying to trip us, and the lights kept coming, relentless and closing fast. I could hear voices now, shouting, coordinating, and I knew we were running out of time. Ahead, through the trees, I saw a break in the canopy, a clearing, and Leota pulled me toward it. We burst out into open space, and I realized we were on the edge of a ravine, a steep drop that disappeared into darkness and rushing water below. The flooding had turned it into a torrent, and there was no way across. We were trapped. Behind us, the lights were getting brighter, the voices louder, and in front of us was a 20-foot drop into water that would sweep us away if we tried to cross. Leota looked at me, desperation in her eyes. "We have to jump. It's the only way." I looked at the ravine, at the churning water, and knew it was a terrible idea. But staying here was worse. They'd catch us, and we'd end up like those other 3 drivers, buried in the woods and forgotten. "Together," I said, taking her hand. She nodded, and we backed up a few steps, getting ready to run and jump. But before we could move, a voice cut through the rain, loud and authoritative. "Stop right there. Don't move." I turned, and standing at the edge of the clearing were 3 men. Talmadge was in the center, flanked by the man in the button-down and someone new, older, wearing a county sheriff's uniform. My heart sank. Law enforcement. They'd brought law enforcement. We were finished. The sheriff stepped forward, hand on his sidearm, and spoke again. "Hoyt Renfro, Leota McRaney, you're both under arrest for theft of medical supplies and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. Get on the ground. Hands behind your heads." I stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing. We were being arrested? For their crimes? Leota's face went white, and she started shaking her head. No, you've got it wrong. We didn't—" The sheriff cut her off. "Save it for the station. Talmadge Puckett here has provided evidence of your involvement. Documents with your signatures, transaction records, everything we need. You're going down for this, both of you." I looked at Talmadge, saw the cold satisfaction in his eyes, and understood. This was the endgame. They'd framed us, turned the entire operation around, and made us the criminals. Leota's years of signing falsified documents. My presence at the wrong time, it all added up to a perfect scapegoat scenario. "You can't do this," I said, voice shaking with rage and fear. "We have evidence. We know about the network. We can prove—" The sheriff raised his hand. "I said, get on the ground, now, or I will use force." Leota grabbed my arm, pulled me close, and whispered urgently, "Jump! It's our only chance." I looked at her, saw the determination, the refusal to give up, and made my decision. We turned as one and ran for the edge of the ravine. Behind us I heard shouting, the sheriff yelling for us to stop, but we didn't. We hit the edge and launched ourselves into the air, into the darkness, into the rushing water below. The impact drove the breath from my lungs, cold water closing over my head, and I felt myself being pulled under, spun around by the current. I lost track of which way was up, lost track of Leota, lost track of everything except the need to breathe. My hand hit something, a rock or a branch, and I grabbed it, used it to pull myself to the surface. I gasped, sucking in air and water, and looked around frantically. Leota was a few feet away, struggling against the current, and I reached for her, caught her hand, and pulled her close. The water carried us downstream, fast and violent, slamming us into rocks and submerged debris. I tried to steer us toward the bank, but the current was too strong, and all I could do was hold on to Leota and hope we survived long enough to find a way out. Behind us, I could hear the engines starting up again, knew they'd be following along the ravine, waiting for us to wash up somewhere they could reach us. But for now, we were moving. We were alive, and that was enough. The current finally began to ease after what felt like an eternity, the ravine widening and the water spreading out, losing some of its force. I managed to angle us toward the bank, and we grabbed onto an overhanging root, used it to pull ourselves out of the water. We collapsed on the muddy shore, coughing and shaking, too exhausted to do anything but lie there. Above us, the rain continued to fall, and somewhere in the distance I could still hear the engines, still hear them searching. Leota rolled over, looked at me, and somehow managed a weak smile. "Still alive," she said. I nodded, too tired to speak, and we lay there in the mud, listening to the rain and the river and the sound of our pursuers getting closer. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But we'd survived this far, and that meant we still had a chance. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew we had to keep moving, had to find a way to expose the network and clear our names. But right now, all I could do was breathe and be grateful for one more minute of freedom. We couldn't stay on that muddy bank. The sound of engines was getting closer, voices carrying through the rain-soaked air, and I knew they'd be on us within minutes if we didn't move. Leota was already struggling to her feet, water streaming from her clothes, her face set in grim determination despite the exhaustion I could see in every movement. I forced myself up, my knee screaming in protest from where I'd slammed it earlier, and we started moving along the bank, staying low, using the trees and underbrush for cover. The forest was denser here, thick with palmetto and vines that grabbed at our legs with every step. We pushed through, ignoring the cuts and scratches, focused only on putting distance between us and the pursuit. After maybe 20 minutes of hard walking, Leota stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. I froze, listening, and heard what she'd heard. Water. Not the ravine behind us, but something else, a different sound, steady and rhythmic. "Drainage culvert," she whispered. "There's a system of them running under these back roads, part of the flood control infrastructure. If we can find an access point, we can use them to move without being seen." It was a desperate plan, crawling through drainage pipes while the county sheriff and Talmadge's people searched above. But desperate was all we had left. "Lead the way," I said. We pushed forward, following the sound, and within a few minutes we found it. A concrete culvert, maybe 4 feet in diameter, jutting out from a hillside with dark water flowing from its mouth. It looked like the entrance to hell, but it was our best option. Leota didn't hesitate, just waded into the water and ducked into the pipe. I followed, the cold water rising to my waist, and we began moving through the darkness. The culvert was claustrophobic, barely enough room to move in a crouch, and the water was deeper than I'd expected, reaching almost to my chest in some sections. The current wasn't strong, but it was constant, pushing against us, making every step a struggle. Our phones provided the only light, weak beams that barely penetrated the darkness ahead, and I tried not to think about what might be in the water with us, snakes or worse. We moved in silence, the only sounds our labored breathing and the echo of water sloshing against concrete. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, the culvert began to slope upward, and the water level dropped. Ahead, I could see gray light filtering in, and we moved toward it, emerging into a larger chamber where several pipes converged. It was some kind of junction point, with a metal ladder leading up to a manhole cover. Leota climbed first, pushing the cover aside just enough to peer out. "We're on County Road 12, she said quietly. "About a mile from the nearest town. If we can make it there, find someone who isn't part of this, we might have a chance." She climbed out, and I followed, emerging onto wet asphalt in the middle of nowhere. The rain had finally started to let up. Just a light drizzle now, and in the distance I could see lights, the glow of a small town against the gray sky. We started walking, keeping to the shoulder, ready to dive into the ditch if we heard vehicles approaching. My body was screaming at me to stop, to rest, but I knew we couldn't. Not yet. Not until we found someone we could trust, someone who could help us expose what we'd discovered. We'd covered maybe half the distance when I heard it. A vehicle approaching from behind, moving fast. I grabbed Leota and we threw ourselves into the ditch, pressing flat against the wet grass. The vehicle roared past, a truck with county markings, and I caught a glimpse of the driver. Not the sheriff, someone else, but clearly searching. They were everywhere, had resources we couldn't match, and it was only a matter of time before they found us. "We can't walk into town," I said. "They'll be watching for us, every gas station, every store. We need another way." Leota nodded, thinking, and then her eyes widened slightly. "The church. There's a small Baptist church on the edge of town, been there forever. The pastor, he's old, been here since before any of this started. He's not part of the network, I'd stake my life on it. If we can get to him, explain what's happening, he might help us." It was thin, banking everything on one person's integrity, but we didn't have better options. "Where is it?" She pointed east toward a cluster of trees on the outskirts of the town lights. "About a quarter mile that way, off the main road. There's a cemetery behind it. We can approach from there, stay out of sight." We cut across a cotton field, the mud sucking at our boots with every step, and made our way toward the church. It was a small white building with a steeple, paint peeling but structure solid. Exactly the kind of place that had stood unchanged for generations. The cemetery was behind it, old headstones tilting at angles, and we used them for cover as we approached the back door. Leota tried the handle, locked. She knocked, soft but persistent, and we waited. After a long moment, the door cracked open, and an old man peered out. Suspicion clear on his weathered face. He was maybe 70, with white hair and eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. "Leota McRaney," he said, voice rough with age. "What in the Lord's name are you doing at my back door, looking like a drowned rat?" Leota stepped closer, keeping her voice low. "Pastor Whitfield, I need your help. We both do. We're in trouble, serious trouble, and you're the only person I trust." The pastor's eyes moved to me, assessing, then back to Leota. "What kind of trouble?" Leota took a breath, and I could see her gathering herself for what came next. "The kind that involves corruption, murder, and people who'll do anything to keep it quiet. The kind that's going to get us killed if you turn us away." Pastor Whitfield studied her for a long moment, then stepped back and opened the door wider. "Get inside, quickly." We entered a small office, cluttered with books and papers, and the pastor closed the door behind us, locking it. He gestured to 2 chairs, and we sat, water pooling beneath us on the old carpet. "Start from the beginning," he said. settling into a chair behind his desk. "And don't leave anything out." Leota told him everything. The medical supply theft, Talmadge's operation, the network of corrupt officials, the 3 drivers who'd been killed, and how we'd been framed to take the fall. The pastor listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each revelation, and when Leota finished, he sat back and shook his head slowly. "I've suspected something was wrong in this county for years," he said quietly. "Good people disappearing, families left with no answers, a feeling that something rotten was growing beneath the surface. But I never had proof, never had anything concrete to point to. Now you're telling me it's worse than I imagined." He stood up, walked to the window, and peered out through the curtains. "They'll be looking for you, the sheriff, Talmadge, all of them. This church won't stay safe for long." Leota leaned forward. "We need to get this information out, to someone outside the county, someone who can investigate without being compromised. The state police, the FBI, anyone." Pastor Whitfield turned back to us, and I saw resolution forming in his eyes. "There's a state police barracks about 40 miles north, near Greenwood. I know a trooper there, good man, not from around here. If anyone can help, it's him. But getting you there is the problem. The roads will be watched, and my car is too recognizable. They'd stop us before we made it 10 miles. I thought for a moment, then said, "What about the medical transport? Leota, you said the county health system has ambulances, vehicles that move between facilities. Could we use one of those?" Leota's eyes widened. "The depot is about 2 miles from here on the north side of town. They keep 3 ambulances there, usually only 1 driver on night shift. If we could get there, get one of those vehicles, we'd have a chance. Ambulances don't get stopped, don't get questioned." Pastor Whitfield nodded slowly. "It's risky, but it might work. I can get you close to the depot, drop you off where the cameras won't see. After that, you're on your own." It was the best plan we had. "When?" The pastor checked his watch. "Now. Before they widen the search, before they think to check here. We go now." He led us to his garage, a small structure attached to the back of the church, and we climbed into his ancient sedan, a car that looked like it barely ran, but started on the first try. Pastor Whitfield drove carefully, taking back roads and avoiding the main streets, and within 15 minutes we were on the outskirts of town near the medical depot. He pulled over near a cluster of trees, killed the engine, and pointed. "There, the white building with the bay doors. I'll wait here for 10 minutes. If you're not back by then, I'll assume you made it, and I'll head home. If anyone asks, I never saw you." Leota reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you. For believing us, for helping. You might have just saved our lives." The pastor's expression was somber. "Just make sure you expose them. Make sure what they've done comes to light so it can't happen again. That's all the thanks I need." We climbed out of the car and moved through the trees toward the depot. The building was quiet, just a single light on in what looked like an office, and I could see 1 ambulance parked in the bay, doors open, ready for use. We crept closer, staying in shadow, and I could see through the office window. 1 person inside, a young guy in uniform, feet up on a desk, watching something on his phone. "We need a distraction," I whispered. Leota thought for a moment, then pulled out her medical bag, still somehow with us after everything we'd been through. She rummaged inside and pulled out a small bottle. "Smelling salts. If I crack this near the office, the smell will draw him out to investigate. You grab the ambulance, I'll deal with him." It was simple, maybe too simple, but we didn't have time for elaborate plans. Leota moved to the side of the building, cracked the bottle, and tossed it near the office door. The reaction was almost immediate. The smell must have been strong because within seconds, the young guy was out of the office, covering his nose, looking around in confusion. I ran for the ambulance, climbed into the driver's seat, and found the keys already in the ignition. Behind me, I heard Leota's voice, calm and authoritative, playing the part of the county nurse. "Sorry. Dropped some supplies. Chemical spill, nothing serious. You okay?" The young guy was coughing but nodding, distracted enough that he didn't see me starting the engine. I put it in gear, and Leota ran for the passenger side, jumping in as I started to roll. The young guy finally noticed, started yelling, but we were already moving, pulling out of the bay and onto the street. "Go! Go!" Leota shouted. And I floored it, the ambulance surging forward. Behind us, I could see the young guy running for a phone, and I knew we had minutes at most before every cop in the county was looking for a stolen ambulance. I turned onto the main road, heading north, pushed the speed up to 60, and tried to look like we were on a legitimate call. Leota was in the back, going through the ambulance's equipment, and she emerged with a radio. "They're going to broadcast our description. We need to ditch this thing before they set up roadblocks. But we needed it to get to Greenwood, to reach that state police barracks. We were caught between two bad options, and I chose the lesser evil. We keep it as long as we can, get as far north as possible, then find another way." Leota didn't argue, just climbed back into the passenger seat and buckled in. The miles rolled past, flat delta landscape stretching in every direction, and I kept waiting for lights in the rearview mirror, for the pursuit to catch up. But the road stayed clear, and I started to think we might actually make it. Then I saw them. Ahead, at an intersection, two county sheriff vehicles parked across the road, a makeshift roadblock. They'd anticipated our route, set up faster than I'd expected. I slowed, trying to decide whether to ram through or turn around, and that's when Leota grabbed my arm. "Stop! Pull over! I have an idea." I looked at her like she was insane, but something in her eyes made me trust her. I pulled the ambulance to a stop about 50 yards from the roadblock, and two deputies started walking toward us, hands on their weapons. Leota jumped out, and I heard her voice, loud and panicked. "Thank God. We need help. We've got a critical patient in the back, cardiac arrest. We're trying to get to the hospital, but the GPS took us the wrong way." The deputies hesitated, and Leota pressed on. "Please, we need an escort. We need to get through. Every second counts." One of the deputies walked to the back of the ambulance, and I held my breath, waiting for him to open the doors and find it empty. But Leota moved to intercept him, pulling out her nurse credentials, talking fast about protocols and patient privacy and liability. The other deputy came to my window, looked at me with suspicion. "Who's the patient?" I forced myself to stay calm, to lie with conviction. "Elderly male, 72, found unresponsive at his home. We're transporting to Greenwood Memorial." He studied me for a long moment, then pulled out his radio. "Let me verify this with dispatch." My heart sank. If he called it in, if they checked and found no record of a pickup, we were done. But before he could key the radio, Leota was there, thrusting a clipboard at him. "Here's the paperwork. Everything's documented. We just need to move now." The deputy looked at the papers, real medical transport forms that Leota must have grabbed from the ambulance, and I saw him wavering. In the distance, I heard sirens, more units responding, and I knew our window was closing. The deputy made his decision. "All right, follow me. I'll clear the roadblock, get you through." He jogged back to his vehicle, and Leota jumped into the passenger seat, her face pale. "Drive. When he clears the roadblock, drive like hell and don't stop." The deputy's vehicle pulled forward, and the two cars blocking the road separated just enough for us to pass. I eased the ambulance through the gap, gave a wave of thanks, and then, as soon as we were clear, I punched the accelerator. Behind us, I heard shouting, heard the deputies realizing they'd been played, but we were already moving, already pulling away. Leota was on her phone, what little signal she had, trying to call the state police barracks directly. Come on, she muttered, and then I heard her connect. This is Leota McGraney, county nurse. I need to report a major criminal conspiracy involving... The line went dead. She tried again, but there was no signal now, and I realized we were in a dead zone, miles from any tower. We have to get there in person, she said. No other way. I nodded, keeping my foot down, watching the road ahead for more blockades. The ambulance screamed north, eating up the miles, and behind us the delta fell away, replaced by slightly hillier terrain as we approached the state line. Greenwood was maybe 15 miles ahead, and I started to think we might actually make it. Then I saw the spike strip, laid across the road, barely visible in the fading light, and by the time I registered it, we were already on it. The tires exploded, all 4 of them shredding at once, and the ambulance lurched violently to the right. I fought the wheel, tried to keep us on the road, but the vehicle was out of control. We hit the shoulder, plowed through a ditch, and slammed into a tree. The impact threw me against the seatbelt, airbags deploying, and everything went white for a moment. When my vision cleared, I was hanging sideways in the seat. The ambulance tilted at a steep angle. I could taste blood, feel it running from my nose, and my ears were ringing. Leota, I managed, turning to look. She was slumped against her door, unconscious but breathing. I reached for her, tried to wake her, but she didn't respond. I had to get us out, had to move before they arrived. I unbuckled, dropped onto Leota's door, and tried the handle. Jammed. I kicked at the windshield, already cracked from the impact, and after 3 hard kicks it gave way. I crawled through, pulled myself out onto the wet grass, and went back for Leota. It took all my strength to pull her through the broken windshield, to drag her away from the wreckage. She was starting to come around, groaning, her eyes fluttering. "Hoyt?" she mumbled. "What happened?" I didn't have time to explain. In the distance, I could hear engines, multiple vehicles approaching fast. They'd set the trap, and now they were coming to finish it. I looked around, saw nothing but open fields and a distant tree line. We couldn't outrun them, couldn't hide. This was it. Then I saw headlights coming from the opposite direction, from the north. A single vehicle, moving fast, and as it got closer I saw the markings. State police. A trooper, maybe responding to Leota's partial call, maybe just on patrol. It was a chance, maybe our last one. I stood up, waving my arms, and the vehicle slowed, pulled over. A trooper got out, hand on his weapon, cautious but not hostile. "What happened here? You folks all right?" I didn't waste words. "We're being hunted. County sheriff, corrupt officials, they framed us for crimes they committed. We have evidence, we can prove everything, but they're trying to kill us before we can talk." The trooper's expression shifted from concern to alertness. "That's a serious accusation. You got any proof?" Leota, now conscious enough to speak, pulled out her phone, held it up. "Everything's on here. Documents, photos, recordings. Everything you need to start an investigation." The trooper was about to respond when the other vehicles arrived, 3 county sheriff cars, screeching to a stop behind the wreckage. The sheriff himself got out, the one who'd tried to arrest us at the ravine, and he walked toward us with his hand on his weapon. "Trooper, these 2 are wanted for felony theft and assault. I need you to step aside so I can take them into custody." The state trooper looked between us and the sheriff, trying to assess the situation. "Sheriff, these folks are making some serious allegations about your department. I think we need to sort this out at the barracks, with proper oversight." The sheriff's face darkened. "These are county matters, trooper, not your jurisdiction. Stand aside." The trooper didn't move. "Until I verify the situation, no one's going anywhere." Both parties will accompany me to the state police barracks in Greenwood, and we'll get this straightened out there." The sheriff's hand moved closer to his weapon, and I saw Talmadge and the man in the button-down emerging from one of the other vehicles. This was about to escalate, about to turn into something violent, and I knew the trooper was outnumbered. But then more headlights appeared, from both directions this time. State police vehicles, at least 4 of them, converging on the scene. The trooper must have called for backup when he saw the crash, standard procedure, and now the dynamics shifted completely. The sheriff looked at the arriving units, saw he was outgunned, and took his hand off his weapon. One of the arriving troopers, a sergeant by the stripes on his uniform, walked up to the sheriff and spoke quietly. "We're going to need you to come with us, answer some questions. Same for everyone else involved here." The sheriff tried to protest, but the sergeant cut him off. "This isn't a request. We've got 2 civilians making serious accusations, and until we sort out who's telling the truth, everyone's coming in, understood?" The sheriff's jaw tightened, but he nodded. They separated us, put Leota and me in one vehicle, the sheriff and his deputies in others, and formed a convoy headed to Greenwood. In the back of the trooper's car, Leota leaned against me, exhausted, and whispered, "Is it over? Are we safe?" I wanted to say yes, wanted to believe that we'd finally reached safety, but I'd learned too much, seen too much, to trust that easily. "We're safer than we were," I said carefully, "but until we get everything on record, until the investigation is complete, we're not out of the woods." The barracks appeared ahead, a solid brick building with state police vehicles parked in neat rows, and we were escorted inside. They separated us again, took us to different interview rooms, and for the next 6 hours I told my story to a succession of investigators, went over every detail, handed over the photos and information from my phone. They were thorough, professional, and I could tell they were taking it seriously. But I also knew how these things worked. Investigations took time, evidence had to be verified, charges had to be filed, and in the meantime, the network would be working to cover its tracks, to intimidate witnesses, to make sure nothing stuck. When they finally let me out of the interview room, it was dawn, gray light filtering through the windows. A detective, someone from a state task force specializing in public corruption, sat down with me in a waiting area. "Mr. Renfro, I want you to know we're taking your allegations very seriously. We've already started cross-referencing with other cases, and there are some troubling patterns emerging. What about the sheriff, Talmadge? Are you holding them?" The detective shook his head. "Sheriff's been released pending investigation. Talmadge Puckett, too. We don't have enough yet to file charges, but they're under surveillance, restricted from certain activities. It's the best we can do right now." My stomach dropped. They were out there, free, and they knew we'd talked. "What about protection for us? If they're released, if they know what we've said," the detective held up a hand. "We can offer you protective custody while the investigation is ongoing. Safe house, security detail, the works. But I have to be honest with you, this is going to take months, maybe longer. And even with everything you've given us, prosecuting corruption cases is difficult. People recant, evidence disappears, witnesses get cold feet." I thought about those 3 drivers Leota had mentioned, the ones who'd been killed and buried. Thought about how close we'd come to joining them. What choice do I have? The detective's expression was sympathetic. "You did the right thing, coming forward. Now you have to decide if you can see it through, knowing it might not end the way you hope." They took me to another room where Leota was waiting, looking as exhausted as I felt. A social worker was with her, explaining options, and when Leota saw me, she stood up, came over. "They're offering protection. Witness program if it comes to that. But Hoyt, I don't know if I can do this. Years of looking over my shoulder. waiting for the case to move forward, knowing they're out there. I understood her fear because I felt it too. But I also knew we didn't have a choice. We'd come too far, risked too much, to back down now. We do it together, I said. We see it through, and we make sure what happened to those other drivers, what happened to us, it means something. We make sure they can't do this to anyone else. Leota looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Together. They moved us that same day to a safe house in another county, gave us new phones with restricted numbers, assigned a security detail. The investigation ground forward slowly, interviews and depositions and evidence gathering, and we waited. Weeks became months. The state task force arrested 3 more officials, uncovered 2 additional distribution points, and the case started to build. But it was slow, agonizingly slow, and every day we lived with the knowledge that Talmadge and the sheriff were still out there, still connected to a network that reached further than anyone had initially realized. 6 months in, the detective called us in for a meeting. His expression told me it wasn't good news before he even spoke. We've run into problems. Key evidence has been challenged, chain of custody issues that our prosecutors say could sink the case. And 2 witnesses have recanted their statements, claimed they were coerced. We're still building, still working, but I need to prepare you for the possibility that this doesn't end with the convictions we hoped for. Leota's face went pale. You're saying they might walk? After everything we've given you, everything we've risked? The detective looked pained. I'm saying the system has limits, and people with resources, with connections, they know how to exploit those limits. We'll keep fighting, but you need to understand the reality. I felt something break inside me, the hope I'd been carrying that justice would prevail, that our sacrifice would matter. We'd given up everything, our lives, our freedom, our futures, and it might not be enough. We left that meeting in silence, returned to the safe house, and I sat there staring at nothing, trying to process what came next. The case dragged on for another 8 months before it finally went to trial. They managed to convict Talmadge on lesser charges, medical fraud and conspiracy, got him 15 years. The sheriff took a plea deal, resigned from his position, and served 18 months. Others in the network were never charged, protected by lawyers and jurisdictional technicalities, and the simple fact that proving conspiracy across multiple counties was nearly impossible. The 3 drivers who'd been killed, their cases remained officially unsolved, deaths by misadventure. No justice for their families. Leota and I were released from protective custody but advised to relocate, to take new identities if we wanted true safety. The network had been damaged but not destroyed, and there were people who remembered what we'd done, who might decide revenge was worth the risk. I took the state police up on their offer, became someone else, moved to a state I'd never been to, and started over with nothing but a new name and the clothes on my back. I don't know what happened to Leota. We were separated for security reasons, sent in different directions, and I hope she found some kind of peace, some kind of life worth living. I work construction now, manual labor that keeps me moving, keeps me from thinking too much. But I can't escape it, can't stop looking over my shoulder, can't shake the feeling that one day someone will recognize me, will remember what I did, and it'll all come rushing back. I don't sleep well. Every car that slows down near my apartment, every stranger who looks at me too long, every unexpected knock on the door, it brings it all back. The rain, the flooding, Talmadge's cold eyes, the feeling of drowning in that ravine. I think about my rig sometimes, still sitting in that lot behind Talmadge's shop, abandoned and probably stripped for parts by now. Think about the life I had before, the freedom of the road, the simplicity of just driving and being left alone. That's gone, and it's never coming back. I traded it for the truth, for the chance to expose what was happening in those Delta counties, and in the end the truth didn't set anyone free. It just rearranged the pieces, shuffled the players, and left the game running. Sometimes I wonder if those other 3 drivers, the ones who were killed, if they had families who still wonder what happened. If there are people out there who never got closure, who still wait for a knock on the door that will never come. I think about calling the detective, asking him to look into those cases again, to give those families something. But I know it wouldn't matter. The evidence is gone, the witnesses are dead or silent, and the system has moved on. I saw a news article last month, buried in a regional paper online. A new county health coordinator had been appointed in that same Mississippi county. A reorganization after the scandal, they called it. The clinic where Leota and I had seen those boxes, it was shut down, officially due to structural issues. Talmadge's shop was sold to a new owner, someone with no connection to the previous operations, according to the article. Clean slate, fresh start, nothing to see here. But I know better. I know how these things work, how the network adapts and rebuilds, how corruption doesn't die, it just changes addresses. I'll carry this for the rest of my life. The knowledge of what I saw, what I survived, and how little it ultimately changed. Leota was right when she said you don't get out of something like this. You just learn to live with it, learn to function with the weight of it pressing down on you every day, and you hope, desperately, futilely, that maybe somewhere down the line someone will learn from what happened. That maybe the next driver who breaks down in the wrong place will be smarter, more cautious, more willing to trust their instincts when something feels wrong. But deep down, I know that's not how it works. Because there will always be another driver, another broken axle, another storm forcing someone off the highway into a place they shouldn't be. And there will always be people like Talmadge, like that sheriff, like all the others we never identified, waiting in those places, running their operations, disappearing anyone who sees too much. I keep a bag packed, always. Same as before, same as when I was in protective custody, because I know that one day, maybe tomorrow, maybe 10 years from now, someone will connect the dots. Someone will realize who I am, where I am, and they'll come to finish what they started on that rainy night in Mississippi. And when that day comes, I'll run again. I'll disappear again. Because that's what my life is now. An endless cycle of hiding and waiting and knowing that the people I exposed, the system I tried to break, it's still out there, still running, still hurting people. And there's nothing I can do about it except survive one more day and then another, and hope that maybe, just maybe, that's enough.